It all started from the moment Kale passed away, and a barefoot woman in black robes, leaning forward, slowly walked along the shadowed corridor of the temple. He was her last and most precious hope, and now her bare feet walked on the dull carpet, absorbing grief, silence, and the farewell cold. Her hair, black as midnight, fell in waves over her shoulders, and her eyes, filled with light, sparkled with pain, eclipsing the flame of the candles like a portent. Overcome by a sudden wave of fatigue, the maiden barely managed to stay on her feet, stumbling unsteadily as if the ground had suddenly become unstable beneath her steps. Suddenly she shuddered as if from a sudden blow, and, losing her balance, fell with a thud to the floor, and her hair, scattered, fluttered into the air. Raising her trembling hands in front of her and barely raising her head, she muttered in a strangled voice that Kyle was no longer alive. He had been mercilessly and cruelly killed. Tears rolled down her cheeks, leaving wet marks, and she stared forward without blinking, as if hoping to see her lost sweet Kale there. Her gaze fell on the steps in front of her, and at that moment her heart sank painfully at the thought that they had actually killed that very guy. Looking at the marble statue with a prayer in her soul, she silently turned to God, begging him to save the one who was the dearest person in her life. Through large, bitter tears, breaking into a whisper, the girl whispered that she was ready to give her life without hesitation, if only he would remain alive. Hestia was the name of the one into whose body she was reborn, a dazzling beauty with black hair, scarlet eyes, and flawless smooth skin. With delight and a slight smile, she looked at her reflection in the mirror, not recognizing in it the person she was before she became the heroine of the novel. Although she was born into a very ordinary family, her own room was filled with coins and wealth, which she kept for good reasons. Hestia's eyes glittered with admiration as she sorted through the coins, thinking that such characters appeared in stories to change their course. In her palms lay precious coins, bright green emeralds, and a brooch that shimmered with scarlet highlights, like the heart of a mythical phoenix. Happy, almost laughing, she threw an armful of gold coins into the air. So much did she love their ringing and shine as if they were her wings. With the same joy, she entered the dark tavern and handed the owner money, declaring that she wanted to buy the status of a noblewoman and get into a brilliant ball. Not listening to the screams, she nodded gratefully and, leaving him with a bleeding mouth and wealth in her hands, walked out with her head held high. The man was secretly happy that he had become rich so easily, and she, shining like the dawn, proudly examined the document with the seal of nobility. With a new name, a new title, and a sparkle in her eyes, Hestia headed to the ball, where noble guests had already gathered and were whispering about the new faces. There, amid the light of the chandeliers and the rustling of dresses, she noticed the novel's main character, that same Diana with pink curls and eyes the color of seaweed. Hestia clutched her heart with her palms, barely containing her excitement, because before her stood the one she had adored since the first page of this magical story. A little further away stood Helios, the crown prince, the hero of the novel with hair as dark as midnight, sparkling golden eyes, and a slight, almost mocking grin. Looking around, Lady Hestia thought with gratitude how strange and wonderful it was that she now had the chance to talk to the most colourful characters in the book. And suddenly, when she was about to come closer, the man stepped forward sharply, his heel sliding off the smooth tile near her shoes with a dull click. He was the most cruel and mysterious character in the entire book, but he continued to be loved for his unearthly beauty, snow-white hair and sword at his hip. His face was frozen in sadness, and his gaze was dull, because according to the plot, he was rejected by his beloved, which left a wound in his soul. His name was Carus, the second main character of the story, a young man with dazzling white hair, violet eyes, and a noble appearance. Mentally, like a devoted admirer, Hestia screamed in her soul how strongly and selflessly she loved him despite his dark fate. And so, at the magnificent ball within the walls of the art museum, where noblemen discussed art and social news, a special atmosphere reigned. Hestia, holding her breath, watched her favorite heroes with keen interest, remaining on the sidelines like a guest from another world. Suddenly she froze, struck to the depths of her soul, hearing them talk about a certain aura of duo, a perfect harmony that is difficult to touch. Turning around, she took one last pained look at the characters, realizing that she would forever remain only a secondary figure in their great story. Diana was a saint with a divine gift, like an angel, who always stood on the side of the weak and healed not only the body but also the soul. Her love for children, her soft voice, and her unfailing kindness made her like a ray of sunshine in a world where darkness was creeping ever closer. It is not surprising that two best friends fell in love with her at once. After all, in one body lived beauty, tenderness, and strength worthy of admiration. Helios, smiling warmly, extended his hand to her and quietly told her that she had always been right, and then asked her to stay with him forever. Carus, like a true gentleman, bowed politely to Diana and said that regardless of her choice, he would always remain close and help her in difficult times. Surrounded by her children, like a guardian angel, Diana stood frozen in indecision, choosing between the two young men who were so dear to her heart. Her eyes shone with the blue light of sincerity, and a kind smile played on her lips, reflecting her inner struggle and love for everyone around her. Having made her choice, Diana happily rushed to her friends, whispering to herself how important it was that they were always there, no matter what. However, there was also a dark character in the story. Duke Orcus, the main villain of the novel, and his daughter with flaming red hair and an evil smile. The Duchess's name was Retona, and she dreamed of marrying a prince in order to gain the power of the Empress, which she sought at any cost. Then, overcome with anger, Retona splashed wine in Diana's face and shouted loudly that such a simpleton was unworthy of being the bride of the crown prince. With a smirk and a sinister laugh, surrounded by her supporters, she declared that the prince should marry her for the sake of political alliance and benefit. Then both young men looked at their friend with anxiety and pain in their eyes, because each understood that her fate and the status of the empire depended on this marriage. Carus clenched his teeth in rage and his eyes flashed with anger, because he could not bear to see his friend and the woman he loved suffer. That day he committed the sin of becoming an avenger. In the silence of the night, he poisoned the Duke's family, killing them in the name of love and devotion. When the vase fell onto the marble and shattered into pieces with a crash, a scream was heard in the hall. Everything changed in an instant, and the fairy tale became a tragedy. In complete shock, Diana screamed, how could Carus act so cruelly, commit murder? And he stood in front of her and tried to justify himself with words. With tears in her eyes, she proudly ordered him to never appear in her life again and began to push him away, not wanting to listen to excuses. The man froze, his heart breaking with pain and shock, his eyes reflecting the bitterness of betrayal and lost hope. Since then, the beauty turned away from Carus forever, deciding that he was just a cold killer who destroyed everything bright between them. A festive atmosphere reigned all around. Guests scattered flowers, the music sounded solemn, as if trying to hide the inner suffering of the heroes. Helios and Diana had a lavish wedding, which was blessed by everyone around, wishing them happiness and many years of life together. Hestia stood in the crowd, watching the romance unfold in awe. A year had passed since she proposed, and now she could see the result. Looking ahead, the girl thought how happy she would finally be to return to her modern world, leaving the fairy tale behind, but with warm memories. The newlyweds sat together, smiling happily, their eyes shining with tenderness and love, which warmed everything around them with their strength and light. Taking a deep breath, Hestia realized that even their best friend was standing somewhere behind the scenes, sharing their joy and happiness in the shadows. As she read the last pages of the book, the girl sincerely cried for her favorite character because he did not have the happy and bright ending she had been waiting for. Carus was a proud and intelligent man who needed to forget his past love and find a place in his heart for a new, bright, and real one. Upset, she thought about the fact that the hero never showed up for the final meeting with his former friends, and she realized it was time to return to her reality. The quiet sound of her heels receding across the marble floor accompanied her decisive step out of the hall, as if ringing with the passing past. With a sincere prayer for her beloved's happiness, a year later, Hestia was finally able to meet him again, filled with hope and warmth in her soul. He was, as always, beautiful. His long, snow-white hair flowed, his face remained cold, and his gaze seemed dead like a shadow without a soul. At that very moment when he stood opposite her in the dark forest, he did not even realize that he was on the verge between life and death, a hair's breadth from death. The novel ended with a lavish wedding for the newlyweds, where love and hope triumphed despite all the trials that befell them. And now Hestia sat in her room, getting ready for bed, thinking that when she returned to her world, all her great riches here would be a thing of the past. Falling onto her bed, she calmly prepared for a night's rest, mentally meeting with her family and friends from her former life who always remained in her heart. With her arms folded across her chest and a slight smile on her lips, she gradually dozed off, plunging into a sweet and peaceful sleep filled with warm dreams. However, when she woke up, she realized with horror that she had never returned to her original world. A real nightmare had taken over her heart and mind. Exhausted, she lay back down in bed, closing her eyes and hoping that she would soon be able to fall asleep and wake up in the long-awaited reality where everything would be different. Clutching the soft fabric of the blanket in her hands, she prayed to all the powers that be that sleep would take her to where her modern world lived, full of hope and bright days. Days passed, the first, the second, and even more, but nothing changed. Time seemed to stand still, slowly passing from summer into cold and gloomy autumn. And more days passed, replacing summer with autumn, and autumn gradually turned into a cold and harsh winter, without bringing any changes. Hestia slowly rose from the bed, sat down on the edge, and, lowering her head, plunged into confusion. She no longer understood anything. With a dull look and a heavy heart, she admitted to herself that for a whole year now she had been unable to escape the world of the novel, as if she had been trapped forever. She gave all her wealth to charity, abandoned her former life, and now lived in poverty, in a small house deep in the forest, amidst silence and solitude. Looking at her withered hands, Hestia wondered if she was truly alive or just a shadow wandering between worlds. Sitting on the cold floor, she cowered within herself, overcome with the fear of living the rest of her life in excruciating loneliness and despair, as if she had lost all hope. She was troubled by the news from the newspapers, which reported that the Marquis of Carus had again attempted to commit suicide, unable to bear the pain and loss. The girl read these terrible headlines, plunging into shock and despair, realizing how deep the tragedy had touched her beloved hero. After losing his best friend and lover, who betrayed him and abandoned him, Carus lost all will to live, plunging into the darkness of hopelessness. Children ran around happily, filling the air with laughter and life, while Hestia read the difficult news in the newspaper with anxiety and horror. Then she stood up and, sighing, walked away, hoping with all her soul that Carus would still find happiness and be able to find inner peace. Clutching the newspaper in her hands, the girl thought longingly about how happy she would be if he could finally become truly happy and free. Every evening, lying in bed, she quietly prayed for his well-being, joy, and that fate would grant him a bright and good future. And so, in a dark dress, she quietly went out into the forest, walking slowly between the tall trees, her shoulders drooping from the weight of her thoughts and bitterness. Her face was hidden by thick black hair, and questions swarmed in her head. Why did she live in this world? And why was her favorite character never able to find happiness? Suddenly, as if in great pain, she fell to her knees, feeling the ground cold and heavy under her weight and terrible suffering. Through tears, with a mad smile on her lips, she whispered that if this is how it will be, it would be better to disappear than to continue living in this cruel world. At that moment, men's footsteps were heard nearby, breaking the silence and bringing with them an unknown hope or a new enormous disaster. Hestia turned around in fear, folding her arms across her chest, not expecting anyone to be there at such a moment of despair and pain. Before her stood Carus, the very man whose eyes burned with coldness and indifference, as if he had long since stopped feeling anything for her. However, instead of stopping, he calmly walked past. And then the girl could not stand it. She screamed, demanding that he stop and hear her. Turning around, the man asked coldly and sharply what she wanted from him, his voice full of harshness and hidden irritation. The surprised lady looked at her handsome man when he shuddered, hearing strange voices that were looking for him among the shadows of the dense forest. As Hestia was about to say his name, he suddenly covered her mouth with his hands, trying to prevent her from revealing their location to the evil enemies. At that moment, the butler and his guards were racing through the large forest, desperately searching for the missing aristocrat, sparing neither effort nor time. The young man hid behind the trees, hugging the sweet girl so tightly that she was overcome with fear, but not a single sound came from her lips. When the voices finally died down and faded away, the lovely Carus breathed a sigh of relief, realizing that the servants were no longer a threat to them and their secret. After realizing that he had the lady in his grip, the man gently released her and apologized for his harsh behavior. Slightly shyly and with genuine interest, Hestia asked the man if there was any way she could help him in this difficult situation. Eventually, the noblewoman brought Carus into her home, noticing and gently pointing out that he looked unkempt and neglected, which caused her concern. Carus offered a measured apology for his coldness and any inconvenience he might have caused, and Hestia smiled and reassured him that he could feel at home there. The guy looked tired and depressed. He sat down on a chair and put his head in his hands, but even in this state he remained irresistibly handsome and attractive. Embarrassed, grabbing her hand, Hestia approached the guest and in a timid voice asked what he was doing in the forest at such an hour and under such circumstances. Carus looked at her silently, and the girl hesitated, embarrassed, trying to say that he could tell her everything without hiding his feelings and thoughts. The noblewoman froze in shock when she heard him say that he was tired of life again and wanted to simply disappear, having lost all hope for a better future. After this, he began to speak quietly and hesitantly, saying that it was strange for him to see her living alone in the forest, far from her family and the familiar world. Hestia lowered her head and said sadly that she could not return home to her family and her country, because the past seemed to be forever behind her. The man listened to her silently, and then quietly said that it seemed that their destinies and lives were surprisingly similar and intertwined. Surprised by such words, the lady slowly raised her head, trying to understand what exactly he wanted to tell her and why it sounded so close. After this, Carus said that his friends had also turned away from him, and he had no place to return to, having lost all support in life. With a heavy heart, the man admitted that now death seemed to him a better way out of pain than continuing this cold and empty life. Clutching the guy's head, she whispered devastatingly that it was then that the girl was stronger than him, because she was able to live on, overcoming all the difficulties and fears. Hestia herself looked sadly at her beloved hero, who became even sadder, as if he had lost his former valor and the bright power within himself. Taking a closer look at him, she suddenly realized that he looked emaciated, pale and thin, like a shadow of his former strength and beauty. Raising her head, Hestia realized how much she had missed him before, and how deep in her heart remained the warmth of past days and hopes. After this, she asked the man to wait a couple of minutes on a chair, promising to return soon and not leave him alone in this cold house. Inspired by the joy of meeting her favorite hero, The lady hurried to the city to buy groceries and cook something tasty and warming for him. Inspired by the happiness of being with him again, she ran home, dreaming of feeding him and surrounding him with care in order to restore the lost warmth and trust. Joy and hope for a new friendship shone in her eyes. She sincerely wanted to become his support and pillar of strength in this difficult world. However, when she returned home, she discovered that the man had not waited for her. He was lying motionless on the floor, as if he had passed away, leaving her in complete despair. The apple fell to the floor with a crash, shattering into thousands of pieces, like a harbinger of the trouble that hung over the girl's soul. The lady froze in horror on the threshold of the house, covering her mouth with her hands and looking with despair in her eyes at the lifeless body lying on the cold floor. She began to tremble with fear, repeating to herself that this simply could not have happened, that this was a terrible dream from which she was about to wake up. Grabbing her lover from the floor, which seemed lifeless and cold, she could not believe that he was truly dead and gone forever. Hestia burst into tears, screaming in great horror and unbearable pain that what had happened was a real nightmare and a terrible tragedy. The girl hugged the dead body of her dear lover, unable to contain the sobs and bitter cries that were tearing her soul apart. On the table lay a suicide note from the guy, in which he apologized and promised to compensate her for all the losses and sorrows, leaving a final message. The next day, news of his death was published and was discussed by society for only one day, quickly giving way to other sensations. After all, soon the conflict between the princess and the prince attracted more and more attention, forcing people to forget about the sad story of the young couple. Hestia read the newspaper intently, clenching her fingers into fists with anger and bitterness, having learned that her lover had died due to discord between friends and an unsuccessful marriage. She felt bitterness with all her soul because the world would so quickly forget her beloved, and her clenched hands trembled from helplessness and inner pain. After the death of her boyfriend, the girl stopped taking care of herself. Her appearance became pale and tired, as if death itself had touched her soul and body. People retreated from her with anxiety and fear, because Hestia looked as if death itself was walking next to her, enveloping her in cold and silence. The guy rudely shouted at her, demanding that she watch her step, when his girlfriend tried to calm him down, but only increased his irritation and anger. As people passed by, they whispered that this lady came to church every day, muttering something under her breath, and that it was not easy for her to speak with the Holy Father. With a heavy head, Hestia walked down the corridor, listening to rumors about the couple's breakup and how the power of holy love in their lives had begun to fade irrevocably. She quietly whispered the names of characters from an interesting book, as if seeking in these words comfort and a connection with a world that was already slipping away from her. Soon her memory came back to her favorite hero, Carus, whose sudden and tragic death left a deep and unhealing wound in her heart. Suddenly, the young girl tripped and fell on the cold floor, unable to keep her balance under the weight of her own thoughts and feelings. Raising her head with difficulty, she barely managed to say that her lover had been killed, and a painful delirium and confusion settled in her mind. Before her eyes stood a statue in the temple, inspiring awe and thoughtfulness, which made her come to a terrible conclusion. Her beloved was killed, and he did not die on his own. Through tears welling up from the depths of her soul, Carus prayed that if God existed, then let him save her beloved and bring him back to life again. The noblewoman woke up in her large red bed from the past and slowly opened her eyes, feeling the familiar atmosphere of former wealth and luxury. Jumping on the spot from slight excitement, she suddenly realized that she had returned to her former time, to her rich house where she had once lived carefree and happily. At first, she couldn't understand how she ended up in bed, and who brought her here from the temple where she was just a few moments ago, as if in another world. A headache tormented her mind, and her thoughts were confused. No one could explain why her consciousness wandered between the past and the present, between sleep and reality. Her bare feet touched the cold floor, and this simple contact with reality caused a mixture of anxiety and relief in her, reminding her that she was still alive. Surprised as she stood up, Carus realized that neither her body nor her soul hurt, and her body was healthy and whole, without a single scratch or wound. It finally dawned on her that she was in the past, and she hurried to the window to look out into the street and figure out where exactly she was now. Outside, in the main square, people were bustling and running in preparation for the important event, filled with a festive mood and anticipation of a miracle. It was the same parade that had taken place before, a parade in honor of the upcoming wedding, a solemn and joyful event for all present. The prince and Diana were preparing to tie the knot, promising each other a long and happy life full of love and understanding. The lady raised her hand to her face and was stunned to realize that she was at the very end of the novel's ending, but she didn't understand why she was there and now. Suddenly, Hestia broke off her anxious thoughts, realizing that now was not the time to give in to fear and dwell on the inevitable future. Turning sharply, the lovely lady rushed away, her white nightgown fluttering in the wind, reflecting her determination and inner struggle. She walked quickly towards the carriage standing in the courtyard, desperately realizing that it was on this day that her lover would try to end his life for the first time. So Hestia ran up to the coachman and with a firm order demanded that he take her immediately to the marquis without giving him the slightest chance to object. She threw a bag of money in the coachman's face, and he, without hesitation, promised to set off immediately to fulfill her request. At night, the carriage sped through the darkness, heading towards the house of another nobleman, where fateful events were unfolding. Looking out the window of a moving vehicle, Hestia firmly decided that she would not allow Diana to make peace with the prince and destroy what had already been predetermined by fate. In the novel, Helios passionately courted the main character, while Carus quietly and devotedly cared for her from the shadows, giving everything he could. That is why Diana, taking Helios's care for granted, rejected the offer of the first passionate young man, not wanting to betray her feelings and promises. The guards kept constant watch at the gates of the mansion, closely monitoring every step, especially at night, when everything seemed tense and suspicious. Noticing the lady's strange nighttime arrival to the owner, the guards shouted, demanding an explanation as to who dared to disturb the peace and enter the territory. The girl's gaze was frightening and cold. Her red eyes and icy face inspired fear and forced even the bravest guards to retreat. The guards began to drive her away, loudly shouting that one could only come to the marquis with an official invitation, forbidding any unauthorized visits. But the lady cleverly outwitted the guards by shouting loudly that Saint Diana was walking behind them, which made the guards freeze in surprise. After that, she quickly ran past the guards without stopping and hurried to her lover, not paying attention to prohibitions and obstacles. The servants, shocked by her unexpected appearance, looked after her in bewilderment, trying to understand who she was and why she had come to them late at night. The butler, standing at the master's door, was in complete shock, casting tense glances at the lady, unable to hide his surprise and disbelief. Without thinking twice, the lady flung open the door to the boys' room, startling the butler, and shouted his name loudly, calling him to life and attention. There, in the half-darkness of the night, Carus stood before her, holding a knife to his throat, despair and pain visible in his cold and lifeless gaze. Seeing the guest, the guy slowly turned to her, but his cold gaze did not hide his internal struggle and dark thoughts about the future. The lady, overcome with horror, covered her face with her hands, unable to bear how much her beloved was suffering and how deep his pain was. Clenching his fist resolutely at his side, he tried to collect his thoughts, not knowing where to begin the speech that could change everything between them. Soon the girl rushed towards him with a firm and confident gait, ready to support him and help him overcome the darkness that enveloped his fragile heart. Surprised and somewhat stunned, Carus looked closely at the strange guest, who was rapidly approaching him with firm determination and without fear. Hestia pushed his hand away sharply and forcefully, causing the weapon to slip from the man's fingers and fall with a dull thud onto the cold floor of the room. The guy, painfully rubbing his head, which was still throbbing from the blow, asked what she was doing and why she was interfering in his fate in such a sudden way. Firmly and confidently, Hestia introduced herself by her name, without hesitation for a moment, and made it clear that she was ready to do everything possible to save his life. Afterwards, with firm determination, the girl declared that she wanted to become his marquise and future wife, to walk beside him through all the trials and intertwined destinies. Uros was the name of the butler who took care of the marquis after the death of his father, a nobleman, taking upon himself all responsibility for the upbringing of the young master. After the loss of his parents, the handsome boy found himself under the care of Uros, who sincerely feared for the fate of his ward and did everything possible to protect him. The faithful servant did not leave his master even when he was rejected by everyone and fell into severe depression, supporting him in the darkest moments of his life. The nobleman's house was in complete disarray. Furniture was overturned, trash was scattered everywhere, reflecting the inner chaos and devastation in the owner's soul. Everyone was terrified that the gentleman might lose his temper and do something terrible to himself, which added tension and anxiety to the atmosphere of the mansion. And then, in broad daylight, a strange girl burst into the room, disturbing the guy's peace and completely changing the course of his dark thoughts and plans. Then, without blinking an eye, she stood right in front of him and boldly proposed marriage, deciding to become his legal wife and life partner. All these surprises completely threw the butler off balance, who watched the event unfolding before his eyes with a surprised and stunned look. Uros, also struck by the girl's unexpected actions, stood motionless, showing a slight smile, full of admiration and some surprise. A battle broke out inside her between a demon and an angel, who argued and sought an answer to the question of what to do next in this confusing situation. And despite all the contradictions, the devil and God in her soul were unanimous in one thing: she should be close to her beloved, supporting and protecting him unconditionally. The man continued to sit with his head down, his long white hair falling in heavy streams, hiding his tired and depressed face. Surprised, the guy suddenly asked her if she wanted to marry him, and the lady, overcome with anxiety, covered her face with her hands, not knowing what to answer. Suddenly, Carus laughed like a madman, and his unpredictable laughter only increased the girl's anxiety, who could not understand his mood. Looking at his hand, the Marquis quietly asked her if he really looked so frivolous and stupid that he was capable of inspiring doubts even in the most devoted of women. Pressing her hand to her chest, the girl began to justify herself by saying that she only wanted to save him, but he interrupted her, showing that he understood everything differently and more deeply than she thought. The noblewoman froze in complete shock when the young man stood before her and calmly said that she could do as she wished and even become his wife, because he really didn't care. The noblewoman, feeling sweat pouring down her face, pointed her finger straight at his chest, filling her gaze with anger and resentment, as if trying to express the full depth of her indignation and the inner fire that did not allow her to remain indifferent. However, Carus did not even listen to her objections, silently turned around and calmly walked away, leaving her the task of sorting out all the matters related to the butler and preparations for the upcoming wedding, as if shifting all the responsibility onto her shoulders. After these words, the servant and the lady were immediately led out of the room together, as if their presence had become unwanted and disturbing, and the door closed behind them silently, leaving the protagonists alone with unexpected tension and understatement. Surprisingly, the couple stood for a long time, looking at each other in complete shock and confusion, not believing what had just happened, struck by the Marquis's unexpected action, which so abruptly changed the course of events and knocked the ground out from under their feet. Not understanding what was happening, The beauty grabbed her head, her eyes filled with confusion and bewilderment, and her thoughts raced in search of an answer to the question of how this could have happened, causing her heart to beat faster from shock and confusion. Hestia introduced herself as the daughter of a noble lord, an exquisite beauty in a luxurious scarlet dress, with thick black hair flowing over her shoulders, which gave her a mysterious and enchanting appearance, as if the night itself had embodied in her image. The butler, having comfortably seated himself opposite, introduced himself by his name, Uros, the Marquise's devoted servant, whose face expressed experience and calm as if he were the guardian of secrets and the keeper of palace order, ready to serve until his last breath. The man did not lose his composure and began to question the lady in detail about her identity, because her appearance within these walls was too unexpected and strange, as if she had appeared out of nowhere, disrupting the usual order and raising many questions. The butler's words about the lady appearing too unexpectedly, simply opening the door and entering without calling anyone or warning anyone, as if violating all the rules of etiquette and decency, sounded like a bolt from the blue, which caused a wave of bewilderment and tension. The words that followed sounded like blows. The lady's actions knocked the Marquis off his feet, as if lightning had struck him with a sudden lunge, upsetting his balance and causing him to experience unexpected pain that echoed throughout his soul and body. Suddenly, the butler, as if carried away by an inner impulse, quickly rose to his feet and, without hiding his sincere gratitude, said that despite everything that had happened, he remained immensely grateful to the woman who had saved his master's life. The lady, hearing these heartfelt words filled with deep gratitude, was slightly shocked, with surprise and at the same time gratitude in her eyes, as if she had not expected such a sincere and warm response. Then the servant, slowly raising his head, restrainedly placed his hand on his chest, expressing with this gesture his inner turmoil and noting that there was something strange and inexplicable in what was happening, which seemed to be hidden behind the lady's external composure. With some surprise and slight wariness, he noted that the woman seemed to know the secret thoughts of the Marquis, who wanted to end his life, and therefore the lady, catching his gaze, froze in indecision, not knowing how to justify her behavior. Through her tears in the depths of her soul, the noble woman realized that she could not tell the whole truth, because her soul rushed into the past, and she came here to protect and save Carus, bringing with her the burden of forgotten and painful memories. Her angel and demon quietly whispered to her that all the supernatural events in novels are just familiar and ordinary things that should not cause fear or doubt in the reality of what is happening around her. The butler, overcome with confusion and incomprehension, stared at her for a long time, trying to understand why the lady had suddenly fallen silent and stopped answering, as if something important had suddenly stopped her thoughts and words. Hestia suddenly became the central character of the story, and loudly and with extraordinary confidence declared that she had the gift of seeing the future, which caused surprise and tension in the room, where everyone present listened with caution to her words. A heavy, almost tangible silence fell between the interlocutors, as if time had stood still for a moment, and everyone tried to comprehend what they had heard, waiting for the next step or an explanation from Hestia, who had disrupted the usual flow of conversation. The servant, seeing her confidence and strange behavior, quietly and with obvious disappointment looked away, not believing the words he had just heard, and internally struggling with doubts that this story could be true. Therefore, the aristocrat resolutely took the floor to prove her case, telling that quite recently the Marquis had given a servant a rare pink diamond with a special order, to present it to the Holy Virgin, which became important evidence of her knowledge. The servant, barely hiding his amazement and inner shock at how much and how accurately she knew about the events, stood in front of her as if not believing his ears and trying to comprehend what was said with genuine surprise and anxiety. With a slight smile, Hestia explained that all of her mysterious knowledge and details could be explained by one thing: the gift of seeing the future, which seemed to have been revealed to her and allowed her to know events in advance, which raised even more questions and doubts among those present. The man thoughtfully lowered his gaze and, pressing his hand to his face, as if trying to hide the growing confusion and heaviness in his soul from what he had heard, he plunged into deep thought, trying to understand the full complexity of what was happening around them. The aristocrat continued her speech with confidence, asserting that she knew in advance that the Marquis would certainly continue his actions aimed at protection and care, and that her intentions were dictated precisely by this understanding, and not by chance or an accidental event. Firmly and with noble determination, the beauty declared that she had come here not for wealth or glory, but with only one goal: to save the life of a nobleman whose fate was under serious threat, and for this she was ready to do anything. The nobleman, finding himself in a difficult situation, could not object and preferred to remain silent. Immersed in his thoughts and confusion, unable to find words to refute or support what he had heard, as if assessing the seriousness and weight of the words spoken. With a cold and calm gaze, the aristocrat calmly said that her decision to become a marquise was dictated solely by the desire to protect the young man who was in danger, and not at all by a desire for his wealth or position. The long red corridor was lit by the soft glow of lamps, and the windows reflected the pale sunset, creating an atmosphere of anxious anticipation and giving everything that was happening a touch of mystery and tension. Sitting in a soft chair, the noblewoman loudly and confidently declared that she had not at all wanted to harm the Marquis, who at that moment was deeply wounded both physically and mentally, and that her actions were dictated only by concern and a sincere desire to help him. The butler, listening thoughtfully to her words, stood motionless, his arms folded across his chest, lost in thought and trying to comprehend the full depth of her confession and the meaning of what she had said, which had forced him to rethink the current situation. The lady waited patiently and with slight anxiety for the servant's answer, but he suddenly spoke up, claiming that he was not involved in resolving important and serious matters of the aristocracy, as if trying to avoid a direct conversation and responsibility for what was happening. When she was advised to speak with the Marquis personally and discuss all the issues directly, the lady smiled happily, feeling support and the opportunity to establish an understanding which inspired hope and great relief in her. The butler bowed politely to her as a sign of respect, and then said loudly and with a touch of concern that she could stay here in this room to rest and sleep a little, as it was already late and some peace would be very welcome. The happy beauty, beaming with a tender smile, thanked him, settling comfortably in the chair, although deep down she felt very tired and exhausted, as if the entire weight of the day had fallen on her fragile shoulders, giving her no rest. In her mind she was deeply tired and depressed, as if the entire accumulated burden of events had suddenly fallen upon her, but outwardly she remained calm and graceful, like a bright star that does not go out even in the darkest times of its life. At this time, the Marquis stood at the window, thoughtfully looking into the distance, his eyes reflecting an internal struggle and confusion, as if he was trying to find an answer to the painful question that tormented his soul and determined his future destiny in this world. While his thoughts revolved around the dark desire to leave this world, Hestia, with firm determination and endless devotion, was determined to do everything possible to save him and bring him back to hope, not allowing despair to take over. With his head down and hiding his inner pain, the man turned to Diana with timidity and doubt, asking the most difficult question that tormented his soul: what to do? Choose life and struggle, or submit to the darkness and give up everything forever? In her mind, Hestia gently praised herself for her brave act, smiling inwardly, realizing that her determination and courage were the beginning of important changes that would forever change her destiny and path. Despite all the doubts and fears that had previously overcome her, her angel and little devil, watching her, were sincerely amazed by her courage and actions, because such a decisive and courageous act is rarely seen even in the strongest and most experienced people who know how to cope with fate. The little helpers constantly shouted and whispered that Hestia really did not want to immediately marry that nobleman, who was not only handsome but also had a difficult character, which caused her internal doubts and worries. Closing her eyes, Hestia ignored their chatter and whispers, and then firmly and decisively declared that what had already been done could not be changed, and there was no turning back time, so she should accept the consequences of her actions with dignity. After this, she confidently took a step forward and loudly declared to everyone present that she had no intention of immediately becoming his wife, but preferred to start as a secretary in order to better understand and feel her feelings and the situation. The devil, pointing his sharp finger at her, angrily said that not long ago she herself had dreamed of becoming the wife of this nobleman without understanding the full depth and gravity of the consequences of such a choice, which now seemed so difficult and unpredictable to her. A distraught Hestia admitted that when she first saw the man on the brink of death, she was overcome with horror, and it was then that she realized that being his secretary was not enough, that much more needed to be done to help and save his life. Her two personalities listened attentively to every word, with smiles and understanding in their eyes, realizing that Hestia was ready to make any sacrifices and trials for the well-being and salvation of the noblemen who became her meaning and support. Stubbornly and firmly, the lady declared that she was ready to do whatever it took to be with this handsome man, regardless of the difficulties and obstacles that she encountered along the way, demonstrating true strength and no small amount of determination. Diana appeared before them as a holy virgin with divine powers, dressed in a bright snow-white dress, radiating purity and light that seemed capable of overcoming any darkness and bringing hope even in the most difficult moments. However, despite her simplicity and kindness, Hestia's position in the temple remained low and inconspicuous, since her origin and modest upbringing did not allow her to take a worthy place among the high-ranking servants of the holy place. Carus, driven by sincere love and devotion, sacrificed his most precious and fertile lands so that she could gain respect and recognition in high society, and so that her status would become worthy of her kind heart and pure soul. Such was the fate of the Holy Virgin, for whom Carus made unimaginable sacrifices and deeds, but unfortunately Hestia herself, disregarding his feelings, married the prince, leaving his devotion and love unanswered and without hope of reciprocity. Therefore, Hestia clearly felt deep dissatisfaction and bitterness because of such a sad and unfair ending to her story, realizing that she herself had broken the fate of the man who had done everything possible for her and even more. The maiden, rushing in the carriage, was overcome with rage and anger at everyone around her. Her fragile heart was tormented by conflicting feelings, and she could not forgive either herself or those who so easily destroyed her dreams and various hopes for happiness. Finally, the coachman announced their arrival at the temple, and the guards hastened to help Hestia carefully descend from the carriage, accompanying her with confident and solemn steps along the stone steps, as if welcoming a new guest to a holy place where her fate was about to change. Hestia was clearly determined to make the life of the Holy Virgin difficult, so that it would not seem too carefree and simple to her, because her inner struggle and determination did not allow her to remain indifferent to the future, and she intended to do everything to test herself and those around her. The lady, rising from her chair and taking the heavy suitcase by the hand, suddenly heard her name called by another person, whose voice was full of excitement and haste, attracting her attention and making her freeze in place, wondering what had happened. It was a clergyman who, without waiting for an explanation, quickly ran up to her, shouting loudly that he had heard about the arrival of the Marquis's carriage and was in a hurry to report important news, causing the noblewoman to feel a surge of anxiety and curiosity at the same time. The noblewoman, without showing much interest and leaving her face almost emotionless, wearily stared at the young priest, who, with surprise and impatience, asked where the Marquis himself was and why he had not appeared with the carriage, causing her inner uneasiness. Proudly and with a touch of irony, Hestia declared that she had arrived in the place of the nobleman himself, as if taking on the responsibility and role that he should have played, demonstrating confidence and hiding her true feelings under a mask of calm. Then, with a gentle smile, she introduced herself as the sweet wife of a wealthy nobleman, as if cementing her new role and establishing her place in this complex and confusing world that now demanded courage and determination from her. The adult priest, amazed by what he heard, spoke words with amazement and even disbelief that seemed incredible to him and not true, which caused an internal conflict and doubt in him. The temple worker shook his head disapprovingly, whispering that she was lying, since it had long been known that Carus was in love with Princess Diana, who had previously rejected his feelings, and this story was common knowledge among the parishioners. However, the noblewoman did not even pay attention to his words, calmly and decisively passing by as if not wanting to waste time and energy on arguments that had no meaning for her and could not shake her resolve. The man shouted sharply after her, demanding an explanation of where she was going, but the girl answered him rudely and unceremoniously, declaring that she had no intention of talking to such fools and insignificant people as he, contemptuously rejecting his words. To each of his objections, she simply threw a bag of money right in his face, demonstrating her strength and determination, and finally the man fell silent, amazed by such a bold and uncompromising answer, losing the desire to continue the argument. Proudly and majestically, she stood before him, putting her hand forward as if symbolizing her power and steadfastness, showing that she did not intend to give in to pressure and would follow her own path, no matter what. The priest, unable to hide his greedy gaze, looked greedily at the bag of money, not hiding his greed and desire to get these riches, which seemed to him a real treasure capable of changing his fate. Holding the shiny coins in her fingers, Hestia calmly explained that she urgently needed to meet with the head minister of the church without the slightest delay, emphasizing the importance and urgency of her visit as it concerned fateful matters. The man in a strict robe, with a soft smile on his face, calmly replied that he had already been informed of her desire to meet with him, thereby showing that he was aware of her intentions and was ready to accept her request with due attention. Irritated and slightly mocking, Hestia stated that she knew perfectly well that he was not the chief priest, and that it was him she wanted to see, because he was the one who could resolve the issues that were troubling her, ignoring official titles and ranks. The guy, without retreating, walked next to her and assured her that he had the same high rank in the church, and that she should not worry at all. But these words did not touch the lady at all, who remained unwavering and focused on her goal. With a wave of his hand, the priest, becoming more serious, began to check her and asked directly whether she had introduced herself to the clergy precisely as the wife of the Marquis, emphasizing the importance of official recognition and compliance with church rules. Looking down, the lady calmly and with dignity replied that she understood his doubts perfectly well and explained that she had indeed married the nobleman only today, and her marriage was still fresh and officially registered, which did not raise any doubts about the legitimacy of their relationship. In his hands was a neatly executed wedding document, official and carefully drawn up, confirming the fact of their marriage and confirming the status of the lady, which inspired respect and left no room for dispute or objection. Seeing the papers, which looked like a genuine contract and were legally impeccable, The priest could not object and remained speechless, realizing that all the formalities had been observed and his doubts were groundless, leaving her alone. However, with a slight smile on his lips, he was in no hurry to believe her right away, and handing the papers to his assistant, quietly said that he would definitely check their authenticity, wanting to be sure of every detail before making a final decision. After this, the priest served her a cup of hot aromatic tea, trying to soften the situation and show at least outward respect, despite his inner doubts and anxiety that all this could lead to conflict. With a smile and confidence, the beauty explained that she had come to this very place to take back the lands that had previously been gifted by the Marquis, asserting her right and expressing her determination to achieve justice, despite any possible resistance. This statement outraged the temple servant. He suddenly jumped up from his seat and shouted loudly how she dared to demand from them what, in his opinion, did not belong to her, expressing deep dissatisfaction and indignation. While Hestia was calmly sipping her tea, the church minister continued to shout, warning that her behavior was incurring God's wrath and that she was blatantly lying, trying to intimidate and embarrass her in front of everyone. Calmly and confidently, Hestia explained that her husband had once given these lands not simply to God, but to the Holy Virgin, emphasizing the importance and personal nature of this gift, which made the issue of ownership especially significant and controversial at the present moment. The man froze, overcome with confusion, not knowing how to properly respond to her words, because if the Holy Virgin was now absent from the temple, then, according to his reasoning, these lands no longer had a true owner, and therefore the church could refuse their ownership. The noblewoman clearly understood that priestesses had always been famous for their greed for land and wealth, and it was this knowledge that gave her the determination to defend her right to the lands, knowing that she faced a strong and cunning enemy. A woman's hand, full of inner strength and confidence, gently rested on the table next to a cup of aromatic tea, as if symbolizing her steadfastness and readiness to join the fight for justice and her rightful heritage. The temple servant bowed with pointed politeness, and leaving the guest in peace, walked away, asking her to wait a little and remain patient so that they could soon continue important discussions that could determine the fate of the lands and their owner. On a high shelf stood motionless an ancient statue, whose cold face, illuminated by a soft light, seemed to preserve a silent memory of the past and watch the events taking place within the sacred walls of the temple, giving the whole place a special solemnity. Lowering her head, the lady sighed with relief, glad that things had not reached the point of serious threats and conflicts, realizing that this world still hung on a fine line between calm and a storm that could break out at any moment. She continued to wait impatiently for the arrival of the saints, when suddenly a human figure appeared next to her, like a ghost from the shadows, which could change the course of events and bring new hopes or trials into her destiny. As she lowered her head back, an old man, the head priest of the church, suddenly appeared above her, bowing warmly and greeting her softly, radiating authority and calm that filled the room with a special solemn atmosphere. Hestia's eyes widened in surprise and shock, not expecting to meet this very man whose appearance seemed fateful and awe-inspiring to her, because he was the very same elder whom everyone knew and revered in the temple. This elderly man with golden eyes shining with wisdom and power was the high priest, the head of the entire temple, the man whose word was decisive in the fate of the believers and the inhabitants of the holy place. Politely and with warmth in his voice, he placed his hands on her shoulders, expressing regret and apology for the behavior of his subordinates, saying that the children of the church should not have treated her rudely, and promising that such a thing would not happen again. After this, he sat down opposite her, looking closely into her eyes, and asked with delicate caution whether she had really come here with the intention of returning the lands that once belonged to the Marquis, asking a question full of doubts and forebodings. The lady nodded in quiet but firm agreement, to which the priest replied regretfully that they were very sorry, but they could not return these lands to her since many circumstances and long-standing agreements stood in the way of fulfilling her wish. As the man spoke these words, his face remained cruel, cold and full of hidden malice, as if duty, honesty, and inner conflict were struggling within him, reflecting the complexity of the situation and its seriousness for all involved. He then added that when the Marquis gave these lands to Diana, he was well aware that most of them would in fact belong to the church, and that this deal was dictated not only by personal feelings, but also by political considerations, taking into account the interests of the clergy. The woman's hands clenched on her knees with excitement, revealing inner tension and fear of a possible loss that could become a heavy blow for her and the final test on the path to justice and happiness. The noblewoman reassured herself with the thought that she was now officially the Marquis's wife, and gathering her courage, she replied that she understood his words and was ready to accept the realities, no matter how difficult they were, demonstrating maturity and inner strength in this difficult conversation. The temple minister, smiling in response, expressed gratitude for her understanding and patience, but his words were interrupted by an unexpected outburst of emotion and harsh accusations from the lady, who clearly decided not to stop there. With a wave of her hand in defiance, she began to portray the church in an extremely unfavorable light, calling the Holy Virgin a villain who took advantage of the Marquis's generosity and the church's trust, thereby destroying established notions and causing bewilderment and condemnation. With a laugh full of irony and mockery, she declared that this story would become a real sensation and would definitely appear in the newspapers tomorrow, shocking the public and changing the view of what was happening, as if foreshadowing the coming changes and scandals. After her resonant statement, she asked the high priest for his opinion on the news, observing his reaction and waiting to see how he would respond to the possible revelation and the upcoming changes that could shake up the temple and society. The man fell silent, clenching his fists on the table, as if trying to contain the anger and inner turmoil that was beginning to build in his soul, because the lady's words were not just accusations, they were a challenge to the very foundations of power and the foundations of the church. Near his hand on the table stood a vase of flowers and neatly arranged books, symbols of calm and knowledge that contrasted sharply with the storm of emotions and tension of the moment, as if reminding him that even in chaos there is a place for wisdom and reason. Playing with misunderstanding, the old man put his hand to his chest and said that he did not understand what exactly the two were talking about, trying to hide his true feelings and save face, although inside he felt an impending threat and the need to make decisions. The lady continued to pretend to be simple and even stupid, saying that the church could not and should not do anything bad, trying to reduce the intensity of passions and present itself in a favorable light, despite all the seriousness of the words spoken earlier. Her feigned words clearly angered the priest, but she calmly and with a slight smile noted that, apparently, the priest did not like her revelations, as if adding fuel to the fire and skillfully provoking him into an emotional reaction. Pressing her finger to her face, she quietly uttered a new shocking piece of news. The crown prince's wife was a loyal dog of the clergy and a two-faced snake, skillfully playing both sides to maintain her power and influence, revealing intrigues and hidden motives. With an evil smile and mockery, the lady asked whether such news could really suit the priest and cause a storm in his soul, testing his patience and moral principles as if playing with fire to check his true feelings. These words made the priest tense up. His face became gloomy and cold. He no longer concealed his discontent and irritation, sitting motionless and with an obvious mood, far from smiles and goodwill. Folding his hands in front of him and intertwining his fingers, the old man thought deeply, Realizing that there was some truth in her words and that her revelations were not without foundation, although their consequences could be very serious and unpredictable for everyone. The sweet and kind Diana enjoyed widespread support from the people, and her image evoked sympathy and respect. But despite this, many aristocrats still did not accept the beautiful noblewoman, considering her former simplicity and modesty a disadvantage for high society. This created a dangerous situation for the church, as incomplete recognition and social tension could undermine its foundations and lead to conflicts that were difficult to predict and control, causing concern among the clergy. Therefore, the old man firmly declared that Hestia was speaking dangerous and sometimes destructive words with her lips, capable of sowing discord and hatred, and that she should be more careful in her statements so as not to bring trouble upon everyone. The maiden, with a cold and mysterious smile, continued to make threats against the chief priest, firmly declaring that she would not be afraid to reveal to the emperor himself the whole truth about their secret deceptions and intrigues, promising to expose their treachery and hypocrisy without the slightest doubt. Strick shouted in denial, categorically denying all accusations and declaring that their temple had never stolen donations, but cared exclusively for the spiritual well-being of parishioners and the fulfillment of their most sacred duties before God and people. With a sigh and a laugh full of mockery, the lady scoffed, asking why the priests were so sure of their innocence if they did not have a single piece of evidence that could refute her words and accusations, putting them in an awkward position. Realizing that it was pointless to continue the argument any further, the old man soon left, asking for a little time to think about what he had heard and prepare for the possible consequences that could follow her statements. Meanwhile, the priestesses were experiencing great anxiety and fear, fearing that all their deceptions and corrupt schemes might be exposed during an inspection by the emperor, and they were already discussing among themselves how to deal with the current situation, trying to find a way out of the crisis. Hestia knew everything that was happening, so she calmly drank tea, serenely accepting the priest's decisions, as if already anticipating how the situation would turn out, and internally preparing herself for any outcome, regardless of its severity and consequences. Rising from her seat, the priest approached her again, and with a slight mockery, she said that she was sorry that no one appreciated her care and the efforts she was putting into resolving the conflict, demonstrating both weariness and sarcasm. Clasping her hands, the old noblewoman happily said that she was glad that they would be able to resolve their dispute quietly and peacefully, without unnecessary drama and upheaval, hoping for reason and prudence in making decisions that would affect her future and the fate of the lands. The man, turning to the marquise with an expression of indignation on his face, tried to object and express his disagreement, but, seeing her calm and steadfastness, he could not find the words to argue with her openly and convincingly. Night fell upon the city. The dark sky was covered with stars, and the pale moon gently illuminated the space, as if giving strength and hope to those who still fight for justice and light in this gloomy world. Breathing heavily and intermittently, the butler approached the aristocrat, apparently very concerned about what was happening and clearly wanting to know what exactly had happened and what her actions had been in the temple, not hiding the excitement in his voice and look. Uros, noticing the commotion, quickly ran up to the girl, persistently asking what she was doing in the temple and why her appearance had caused so much talk, expressing both alarm and curiosity, trying to understand the essence of what had happened. The satisfied and radiant beauty proudly showed the document that confirmed that she had successfully reclaimed the Marquis's lands, symbolizing not only her victory but also the restoration of justice, causing everyone around her to admire her determination. The butler did not hide his joy and was genuinely delighted by this news, smiling and expressing happiness along with her, because for both of them this was an important and long-awaited event, that changed much in their destinies. Together, filled with happiness and relief, they began to dance, rejoicing that all her efforts and brave actions had brought the desired result, lighting up the surrounding space with their smiles and laughter. Carus looked thoughtfully out the window, immersed in the depths of his thoughts and reflections on the upcoming events, on the destinies that were so unpredictably intertwined at this fateful moment, finding no peace in his soul and reflecting on the future. At this time, the aristocrat was talking casually with the servant, discussing various little things and important details, trying to distract herself from difficult experiences and maintain light conversation, which helped her maintain calm and confidence. Carus, who had been watching their conversation, unable to hide his worries and inner doubts, suddenly turned around, decisively leaving everything behind and walked away, as if trying to escape the gravity of the situation and find solace in solitude. The lady felt a strange gaze directed at her and looked up, turning around in surprise, while the servant, noticing her confusion, asked why she had not yet told the master the whole truth and the important details that could change the course of events. The butler felt joy and pride for the Marquis's wife, admiring her cunning and ability to maneuver everything to achieve the desired result, seeing in her a true strategist and strength of spirit capable of overcoming any challenge. Carus was not only her beloved husband, but also the embodiment of the ideal, handsome, noble, and perfect, like a prince from the most romantic fairy tales, who is ready to protect and support his chosen one in everything. Hestia asked the servant to act in her place and tell the master, her husband, the important news because their marriage was still very new, and she wanted him to hear this news firsthand, trusting the assistant to be her voice in this matter. Uros readily agreed, and, wanting to give the lady the opportunity to rest after a busy day, advised her to relax and informed her that a personal maid would probably be sent to her who would take care of all her needs and comfort in the near future. Tired and exhausted, Hestia sank softly onto the soft red bed, feeling how the entire past day had rushed by, leaving behind fatigue, but at the same time a sense of accomplishment that gave her inner peace. A satisfied smile appeared on her face, reflecting satisfaction and confidence that tomorrow she would finally be able to inspect the lands that had been returned to her and make sure that all formalities had been observed and justice had been restored. The aristocrat herself did not notice how her eyes gradually closed and she fell deeply asleep on the bed, stretching out her arms, which seemed a little disheveled, as if symbolizing her complete relaxation and readiness for a new day full of hopes and accomplishments. In the man's hands lay a document that contained the news of the return of the lands back to the Marquis, and, reading these lines, the man could not hide his irritation, since such news clearly did not bring him joy or satisfaction. The hand clutching the paper trembled with irritation, and the temple servant standing in front of him flinched in fear. Sensing the tension in the atmosphere and realizing that what was happening could have serious consequences for everyone involved in this story, the prince, throwing the paper aside with mockery and disbelief, loudly declared that he would not believe in the existence of the Marquis's wife until he saw her in person, expressing doubt and disdain for the news he had heard, as if brushing aside possible changes. The man's golden eyes expressed discontent and irritation, reflecting an internal conflict and doubts about the news that had turned his familiar world upside down and forced him to reconsider his views on what was happening. Kyle, sitting in a chair in the hallway and carefully studying the documents, could not help but notice that his wife had done a tremendous job, demonstrating willpower and determination, which would inevitably influence the further course of events in their lives. Hestia put on an elegant new green dress and admitted to herself, with slight awkwardness, that it was a shame she hadn't consulted her husband earlier, realizing that it could have avoided many misunderstandings and strengthened their mutual understanding in the future. As a result, she was sitting in the same room with her new husband, completely not expecting that he would soon invite her to spend time together, which became a pleasant surprise for her and the awakening of new feelings and hopes for a future together. When young Hestia woke up, a tall, grey-haired Uros came in and politely informed her that the master, her husband, was calling her, which caused mixed emotions in the girl's fragile soul, from joy to slight excitement and doubt. Obedient and a little timid, the maiden hastened to respond to the aristocrat's call, but deep down she was afraid that he might reproach her for making an important decision without his participation and prior discussion, which could create tension between them. Thoughtfully and with some surprise, Kyle pronounced his wife's name as if hearing it for the first time, trying to feel every note and understand what history and secret this name concealed, shrouded in mystery and expectations of the future. The girl looked up decisively and looked boldly into the guy's eyes, radiating natural beauty, emphasized by her neatly styled hair, gathered into an elegant hairstyle, and soft fair skin that seemed to glow from within, revealing her true beauty. In the end, they stood silently, immersed in each other's deep, almost hypnotic gaze, not looking away and not uttering a word, because in this silence was hidden the fullness of feelings, emotions, and understanding that were more important than any words. Realizing that she had remained silent for too long in response to her husband's question, the girl finally gathered her courage and spoke, admitting that he was right. Her name was Hestia, and she was the Lord's adopted daughter, revealing to him one of the most important secrets of her life. Sighing heavily, the young man, with barely concealed reproach and a hint of deception, gently reminded her that she had once been anything but an aristocrat, causing the lady's soul to feel inner tension and uncertainty about her own position and past decisions. Nervously clenching her fists and sitting on the sofa, the lady felt her heart beat faster when Kyle again turned to her with the question of why she decided to marry him at all, demanding an open and sincere answer to such an important question. Confused and a little awkward, the noblewoman hesitated, trying to collect her thoughts, but the words seemed to get stuck in her throat, and she only repeated one short word, I, as if trying to express her feelings, but not finding precise and appropriate formulations for them. Finally, with a fiery gaze and sincere determination, she confessed that she hated the crown prince and his wife, expressing her deep feelings of anger and resentment that had long lingered in her heart, causing a storm of emotions and internal struggle. She decided to be somewhat honest with him and looked angry, causing a cold sweat to run down Kyle's face, reflecting his surprise and inner turmoil from hearing the confession, as if faced with an unexpected truth that was difficult to accept. After this, the aristocrat added that she wanted to force these people to apologize to Kyle and help her husband stop thinking about the bad, trying to free his soul from the weight of grievances and bitterness that weighed on his heart. She sought revenge on the imperial couple for all the troubles and evil they had caused her husband, desiring justice and retribution for the suffering and injustice caused, piercing her words with deep meaning and pain. Kale listened to her silently, his gaze downcast, his white curls falling softly over his face, reflecting the inner struggle and emotions he was trying to hide, but which could not go unnoticed in this tense moment. Pressing his palm to his chest and bowing his head slightly, Uros explained to the gentleman with respectful seriousness that his new wife apparently possessed the rare gift of seeing the future, and it was precisely because of this that she acted with such confidence. Kyle stared at his faithful servant with surprise and slight confusion, not fully understanding what exactly he was talking about, although his face remained calm, as if he was trying not to reveal his inner doubts. After a short pause, the man ironically suggested that perhaps the butler should have retired long ago, hinting that he had begun to lose his mind and indulge in strange fantasies unworthy of a sane person. In his justification and confirmation of his words, Uros firmly stated that the lady knew in advance at what exact moment the gentleman needed to be saved, and, moreover, she also mentioned the pink diamond that the Marquis had given to the Holy Virgin. The Virgin accomplished the seemingly impossible. She managed to return part of the lands previously lost back to her husband, thereby proving not only her determination, but also a deep devotion that no one expected from her at the very beginning. After this, the servant, full of respect, noticed that the Marquis's wife really seemed to sincerely care about her husband, and her actions were dictated not by cold calculation, but by genuine concern for his fate and well-being. The young man asked with a hint of distrust in his voice if he and the lady had never met before, since her behavior and attention to him seemed too personal and emotional, as if there was already a hidden connection between them. After hesitating for a few moments, the girl slowly lowered her head, avoiding his gaze, and was in no hurry to answer the question posed, as if an internal struggle was taking place inside her between the truth and the need to keep a secret. This is why the man considered her intention to marry him so strange, and her concern for him suspiciously deep, because he could not understand where so much feeling came from, if they were, in his opinion, complete strangers before the wedding. The woman's face instantly darkened when the question was asked whether there was some other hidden reason why she had chosen the Marquis for marriage, as if these words had touched a painful memory or doubt in her. Stubbornly and with inner determination, raising her head, young Hestia, calmly but firmly, asked her husband if he really did not like what she was doing, and whether all her actions really caused him only mistrust and rejection. The handsome young man listened silently to her words, which contained a desperate proposal. If he was truly unhappy with their union, then she was ready to divorce and leave forever, without holding him back or putting herself between him and his happiness. With her hands folded in her lap and looking straight ahead, Hestia waited with restraint but determination for the young man's answer, ready to let him go in advance, because she did not want to be a burden to him or an unnecessary third wheel in his life. But Kyle only turned away silently, and then suddenly spoke up, sharing the news that his ex-girlfriend, now the Crown Prince's wife, had recently sent him a letter full of hints and hidden dissatisfaction with their actions. He calmly added that it was Hestia who would have to meet with them in person and talk, since it was she who had started the process of returning the lands, and now this story had gone beyond the borders of their home, requiring diplomatic steps and determination. Hestia felt a little embarrassed, but at the same time her heart was filled with genuine joy from her husband's words, because he gave her freedom of action, allowing her to make decisions and act as her conscience dictated. Her inner essences, the angel of goodness and the demon of determination, were ready to strike back at the prince and his wife for the grievances they had caused, harboring within themselves a thirst for just retribution for all their past atrocities and vile deeds. Nodding slightly and silently expressing agreement with her husband's decision, the lady said in a restrained tone that she would certainly return to him as soon as she had completed all urgent matters concerning the Crown Prince and could settle everything calmly. The young man, excited and thoughtful, agreed to help and promised to write a letter to convey to his former friend the bitter truth. Hestia was not a deceiver or an impostor. She was, in fact, his legal wife, a mysterious woman with a noble bearing, whose appearance suggested a mixture of aristocratic severity and feminine softness, thanked the young man for his kindness with sincere respect and a slight smile. Almost immediately after a short conversation with him, when she tried to stay, her ex-husband coldly showed her out the door, and now she stood alone in the empty corridor, with an awkward, almost apologetic smile on her lips. At that very moment, hearing the door creak, the butler rushed towards her, loudly shouting her name, with panic in his voice, as if he was afraid that in another moment he would lose sight of her forever in this house. He urged her not to take the gentleman's cold and harsh words too much to heart, because it was precisely such words that could deeply hurt and leave an indelible mark on the soul, although they were not at all directed against her personally. Hestia calmly reassured her devoted servant, gently assuring him that everything was under control and that she was completely fine, as she now had an important and urgent matter that required the fastest and most thorough solution possible without unnecessary worries and distractions. Then, with a serious and gloomy expression on her face, the aristocrat decisively announced that she was forced to meet with the crown prince, realizing that a lot depended on this meeting and that she simply could not refuse it under any circumstances. Uros, without a moment's hesitation, firmly and confidently assured her that they would fully prepare everything necessary for her departure, and would provide her with all possible assistance to make this difficult and important moment in her life easier. Waving his hand to the side, the head butler loudly ordered all the staff to immediately prepare and help the lady go to the prince, taking on the organization of the reception with full responsibility and attention to every detail. The maids, overcome with mild excitement and genuine surprise, listened intently to every word of the strict order, trying to remember every detail and imagine how exactly they would be expected to assist in such an important and fateful event. After receiving the order, several devoted maids, with genuine enthusiasm and trepidation, hurried to their mistress to carefully and meticulously help her dress in an exquisite formal dress, carefully preparing everything necessary for the meeting with the crown prince. Hestia looked composed and sophisticated, her dress adorned with delicate purple and gold hues, and her hairdo with a neat bow completed the look, highlighting her nobility and impeccable taste at this important moment. She could not take her eyes off her own reflection in the mirror, admiring her graceful beauty and magnificent outfit, while the maids, proudly and joyfully, watched the result of their painstaking and devoted work. The maids genuinely cared for their mistress, as if she were their own mother, with a smile on their lips and warmth in their hearts, genuinely happy that they were able to please her and make this important moment truly special and memorable. Taking the hem of her elegant dress in her hands and smiling a light, almost enigmatic smile, the lady discreetly informed the entire workforce that she was leaving for an important meeting, saying goodbye to them and expressing gratitude for their help. Diana, gracefully leaning on the arm of her handsome husband, walked confidently across the room. Her pink hair shone softly, and her blue eyes radiated innocence and purity, emphasizing her natural beauty and sophistication in every movement. When the main character, Hestia in reality, was spotted in the hall, everyone froze in amazement at her dazzling beauty. No one could believe that such a gentle and radiant girl could ever fail in anything important. By bowing respectfully and curtsying, the noblewoman expressed her deep respect for the imperial couple, her graceful and elegant gesture emphasizing the honor and loyalty she felt for her highest patrons in the palace. While the man spoke with enthusiasm, his wife silently and attentively watched the marquise, showing genuine interest in her every word and gesture, as if trying to unravel all the secrets of her character and intentions. Suddenly, Diana spoke, cautiously asking the aristocrat who had come to visit them if they had met somewhere before, trying to discern familiar features and understand where this mysterious connection between them could have come from. Hestia first saw Diana in church, where she was caring and tenderly helping to heal commoners, showing genuine kindness and a desire to ease the suffering of those who were weak and needed help in their most difficult moments. Back then, the girl was dressed simply but elegantly. Her soft smile and innocent look gave her a special charm that was impossible to forget, like a shining ray of hope among the grey everyday life and various difficulties. Smiling, the beauty carefully healed the wounds of others, sparing no effort or time, helping those in need and giving a piece of her warmth to everyone who turned to her for support and compassion during that difficult period. And then Hestia realized that she was one of those who had once been healed by this holy virgin, and she understood why everyone loved Diana so deeply, because she always carried herself with dignity and genuine care for everyone around her. Now, having become the wife of a prince and ascended to the highest social pedestal, the Seine appeared only in luxurious palaces and at brilliant balls, accompanied by her husband, completely forgetting about the commoners to whom she had once dedicated her life and strength. Hestia, pretending to be a little silly, smiled softly and said with a touch of irony that Diana must have mistaken her for someone else, thereby hiding her true understanding and feeling a little embarrassed by the sudden meeting. Together with the imperial couple, they settled into a cozy living room. Hestia settled into a comfortable armchair, and the imperial couple on a soft sofa, surrounded by expensive furniture and an atmosphere of grandeur and tranquility that reigned in this room. The girl, with a slight tremor in her hands, solemnly handed the prince a personal letter from her husband, and then carefully placed in front of him the official document confirming their legal marriage, so that there would be no doubt about her true identity. After this, with a gentle wave of her hand and with confidence in her voice, Hestia said that this evidence was quite sufficient to confirm her authenticity and finally settle all issues related to her status and rights. Suddenly, Helios came to the conclusion that the lady had not lied at all, and that all this had been merely the Marquise's exaggerated behaviour. Then Diana turned to her husband with a request to allow her to look at the letter to verify the truth. Grimly grabbing the documents in her hands, the girl began to carefully read the letter from her former friend, not believing her own eyes, trying to comprehend what had really happened and how serious this news was for everyone present. The couple, overcome with disbelief and surprise, could not believe that their former friend had made such a hasty decision to marry, especially given his usually cautious and measured nature in all life matters and important decisions. Helios completely agreed with his wife, confidently asserting that Cale was definitely not the type to make such a hasty and ill-considered decision, which further increased their surprise and doubts. All the circumstances and evidence, including the documents and the carriage crew, inexorably testified to the truth that the Marquis had indeed decided to marry, which inspired respect for his decision and gave it seriousness and weight. Helios, his hand pressed to his chin and his brow furrowed in thought, finally accepted the bitter truth with difficulty. His former best friend had indeed gotten married, which had come as an unexpected and profound shock to him, and he had to come to terms with it. Now, this wife, sitting in front of them, smiled softly and sweetly, radiating beauty and calmness that seemed to contrast with the excitement and tension in the room, making everyone present think about new changes. The imperial couple, having learned such unexpected and important news, clearly did not look pleased. Helios stared at his wife with irritation, and Diana sat, overcome with shock and not believing what she had just heard and seen with her own eyes. Helios spoke sharply and categorically, declaring that even after becoming a marquise, the girl had no right to appropriate the temple lands, since this land originally belonged to others and was their legal property, which could not be simply taken away. However, the girl did not give in to the prince's threats, and calmly replied that she had only received a fair and logical answer, based on careful analysis and common sense, which left no doubt about her rightness and the justice of her actions. The prince and the noblewoman got into a heated argument over whether she was truly a threat to them, but the noblewoman firmly insisted that the land had originally belonged to Diana and was only later transferred to the temple's ownership, which changed the entire essence of the conflict. The Holy Virgin shuddered at the words she heard, which accused her of extortion and abuse of her position, feeling frightened and oppressed by such heavy and unjust accusations that seemed to fall upon her suddenly. Rising to her feet with sudden determination, Diana loudly and shrilly declared that the temple had no private property, and all its possessions belonged exclusively to the gods, who were to be served with a pure heart and faith. However, the imperial couple was powerless to respond to these words, unable to find any way to refute the accusations that the saint and her husband were using her sacred powers exclusively for their own interests and for the benefit of the nobles, forgetting about the common people. Before diving into the past, there was a time when Hestia had completely lost her mind and, in search of salvation, went to the temple, begging the minister to arrange a meeting with the Holy Virgin, hoping to find comfort and help in a difficult moment. However, at that very critical moment, when she was on the verge of death, she was rudely rejected, dealing a painful blow to her soul, saying that a saint did not have time to waste her energy on a non-entity like her, leaving her in complete despair and loneliness. After hearing these cruel and cold words, the priest, without the slightest regret, turned around and left the poor girl lying on the stone steps of the temple, defenseless and doomed, slowly approaching her inevitable and painful death. Confused, overcome with bitterness and tears, Hestia was forced to accept the bitter truth that the Holy Virgin had become proud of her power and vanity, ceasing to care for the common people who had once trusted her mercy and help without reservation. Raising her hand in a light but expressive gesture, Hestia, with a deep and piercing gaze, asked the agonizing question of whether this maiden was truly acting in accordance with the divine will or was guided only by her own selfish motives and vanity, forgetting about people. Stuttering heavily and at a loss for words, Diana was unable to find an answer to such harsh and fair reproaches, which is why her husband quickly intervened, standing up for his wife, trying to smooth over the conflict and warn her against further accusations and misunderstandings. Gesturing to the lady with his hand with a slight sternness, he ordered his guest to be careful with her words and watch her language in order to avoid unnecessary misunderstandings and maintain respect in a conversation that seemed quite tense and important for everyone present. Raising her hand to her chest in a graceful gesture, Hestia feigned an apology, gently explaining that she had merely misspoke, trying to ease the tension in the conversation and not provoke further arguments, despite her inner turmoil and doubts. Diana was deeply moved by the words of her guest, who said that her husband, contrary to expectations, insisted that the donated lands remain in the possession of the temple, emphasizing his respect for traditions and vows, despite all the contradictions. Sitting next to the imperial couple, the girl decided to speak openly and honestly, telling that Kyle gave the lands to the saint solely because of the most tender feelings he had for her, and was driven by the old love that still lived in his heart. The aristocrats froze upon hearing her words, lost in thought about the fact that perhaps they wished to see the guest's husband again, bound by the bonds of an old love that could limit his freedom and influence his decisions and actions in the present. With their heads bowed in silence, they had nothing to say in response, and Hestia, with a slight smile of satisfaction, sat in the chair, realizing that she had managed to win and gain the upper hand in this difficult dispute, leaving them without words and doubts. Then she followed logic and decided to do everything possible to make the Marquis's actions clear and understandable to everyone around him, because only then would Cale be able to emerge innocent from this complicated story and finally let go of his former love. With a dark but sly smile, Hestia said that she had no intention of offending them, but she had no intention of returning the lands so easily, deliberately emphasizing her determination to preserve what belonged to her by right and honor. Diana, turning to her companions and her husband, noticed how he suddenly darkened and fell silent thoughtfully, as if deep down he was experiencing displeasure and an internal struggle with what was happening around him and with her words in particular. Hestia froze in surprise when she heard the words that the prince was not in love with her, that she had neither manners nor dignity, and that Carl had celebrated the wedding the very next day after the marriage of his former friends, which seemed strange and offensive to her. With a slight, ironic smile, the girl noted that in such a situation there was really nothing surprising, since the prince's circumstances and actions were complex and unpredictable, and her own role in his life remained a mystery to many. The imperial couple was calmly explained that their marriage process differed significantly from that of ordinary people, with its own strict traditions, rituals, and peculiarities that could not be ignored or simplified at their own discretion. Helios, with a thoughtful expression on his face, asked why Cal had chosen her as his wife, trying to understand the motives and reasons behind his friend's unexpected and important decision. In response, Hestia said with slight pride that she too had an unusual and rare superpower, similar to the one Diana had, but it manifested itself in a completely different way, which made it unique and significant in the eyes of the prince. The nobles looked at Hestia with obvious surprise and genuine interest, eager to learn what kind of magical power she might possess, as such abilities always evoked admiration and respect among the nobility and common people. With a slight smile on her lips, Hestia replied that her gift was the ability to foresee the future, which allowed her to look beyond the veil of the unknown and foresee events that had not yet happened, thereby acquiring a rare and valuable gift. Helios, in turn, looked at her with suspicion and distrust, clearly not believing her words, and his gaze was filled with hidden anger and rage, as if he doubted the sincerity or truthfulness of what he heard. Diana looked as if she believed Hestia, but she held back her emotions, biting her lip, and the tense expression on her face betrayed fear and anxiety, as if she had a premonition of upcoming trials and changes. Raising her finger in a confident manner, the aristocrat spoke with determination and confidence, asserting that she would prove to everyone present her ability to predict the future right now, ready to surprise and amaze with her gift without a shadow of a doubt. When Cale listened to her story at home after the meeting, he curiously asked what exactly she had told the imperial couple, expecting to hear the details and learn how Hestia had been able to influence the course of events with her prediction. Hestia, smiling and slightly playing with words, replied that the Imperial Guard would soon catch a major robber, which sounded mysterious and promised to soon reveal an important secret that worried many in the capital and the court. Kyle quickly came to the conclusion that this mysterious thief was the one who had been stealing the jewelry, and that this prediction might indeed be the key to solving the long-awaited crime that had long gone unpunished. The prince and princess did not immediately believe her words, and Helios proudly declared that they would still see who the real swindler really was, hinting that the real truth would come to light and reveal hidden intentions. Hestia began to play with her fingers when the conversation turned to Diana and her demands for the lands to be returned, but soon fell silent, as if not wanting to delve into a painful topic and preferring to leave some details behind the scenes, hiding her true feelings. Awkwardly and with slight embarrassment, the aristocrat concluded her speech by admitting that, in the end, Diana had come to terms with the return of the lands to the Marquis and accepted this fact, although internally, perhaps, she continued to feel bitterness and regret. Kyle, leaning against the cold wall of the house, began to say thoughtfully that everything that was happening seemed strange and incredible to him, especially how easily he had managed to get his land back. He and his wife stood in the dark corridor, surrounded by silence and mystery. Then, to his wife's surprise, he thanked her for her help, sincerely appreciating her support and participation in difficult matters that sometimes seemed beyond her power, and expressing deep gratitude that was difficult to hide, even in such an intimate setting. Leaning towards her face, the man quietly added that he wanted to show her the full depth of his gratitude. Their faces were so close to each other that it seemed they could read each other's thoughts and feelings without words. The noblewoman was slightly embarrassed, feeling the blood rush to her cheeks and the whole world seemed to disappear when the man approached her, causing a timid excitement and tender confusion in her fragile soul, which she could not completely hide. Kyle, standing next to him, looked as reserved and majestic as ever. His incredibly violet eyes sparkled like precious stones. His grey hair was pulled back into a neat ponytail, and his white shirt emphasized his aristocratic posture and unshakable confidence. Responding with a thoughtful and deep look, the aristocrat plunged into thoughts about what exactly she could demand from him as a token of gratitude, carefully going over in her mind the possible options that could strengthen their mutual relationship and deepen the trust between them. Slowly, thoughts began to swirl and intertwine in her head, causing such heat and excitement that her face glowed with a delicate blush, as if paint was slowly spreading across her skin, reflecting inner experiences and a deep, almost inexpressible excitement. Her unusual and mysterious expression suddenly frightened the man, causing him to retreat a few steps, and a strange gleam lit up in the lady's eyes, like a hidden flame or an unknown secret that she did not want to reveal to anyone. Hestia, feeling embarrassed and confused, began to carefully wipe the saliva from the corners of her lips, because she could not decide what exactly to ask her husband for, since every wish seemed simultaneously important and frightening to her, as if she were afraid of the consequences. Finally, slightly embarrassed, she put her hand behind her head and admitted that she had not expected an answer from her husband at all, but had acted solely of her own free will, decisively and independently, guided only by her desires and convictions. The beauty, with gentle persistence, asked her husband to help her hire a tutor, adding that she had already chosen a madam, a woman with influential connections and a difficult reputation, which caused the guy mild shock and no small amount of surprise. Folding his arms across his chest, he sternly asked if this particular lady was really the one who should become her tutor, and, having received an affirmative answer, with some surprise and hesitation, he agreed to help, realizing the importance of her request and the potential consequences. Looking at her husband with an expression of slight bewilderment, and not understanding the reason for his strange reaction, Hestia could not understand why he reacted this way, because she did not ask him for anything unusual or forbidden, but only ordinary and reasonable help. Formerly a member of a renowned and respected salon, Madame Harmony was Diana's closest confidant, providing her with vital support in her dealings with the nobility and helping her navigate the complexities of court society. This close and secure environment was shattered after the tragic and sudden poisoning of the family, which prevented the Holy Virgin from continuing her ministry, as everyone drank the poisoned tea and died, leaving behind pain and emptiness in the hearts of their loved ones. The influential and respected nobles, realizing the importance and significance of the Holy Virgin for their society, immediately changed their minds and stopped all opposition to her, respectfully accepting her into their society, which became a real victory and recognition for her. However, not all participants in court intrigues felt love for Diana, especially the maids associated with the former friend, who, despite their outward calm and peace, hid envy and secret grievances inside, which made the atmosphere around her tense and difficult. Internal doubts and contradictions tore at the girl herself, like a struggle between an angel and a devil who could not come to an agreement and understand the true intentions of Hestia, who was trying to hire a close friend of the Holy Virgin as a tutor, which caused deep reflection. Hestia, as if masking her true feelings behind a stone face devoid of emotion, plunged into thoughts about the correctness of her choice, weighing the pros and cons, realizing that her future and the fate she was preparing to accept largely depended on this decision. In the court romance, Madame Harmony from the prestigious salon was the only one who did not go against Diana, admitting that she really should not give up her sincere and deep love for the prince, despite all the difficulties and obstacles. Long hours were spent studying ancient books and scrolls to teach the commoner the basics of etiquette and palace culture, allowing her to better adapt to life at court and feel confident in the company of nobility and aristocracy. For the Holy Virgin, the temple and the priest served not only as a religious support, but also as important political allies, supporting her positions and influencing court affairs, strengthening her authority and weight in society. At the same time, Madame Harmony, from the Salon for the Princess, served as a spiritual mentor who taught her refined manners and behavior, helping her become a true lady and a worthy representative of high society, capable of shining at the most important receptions and balls. Hestia realized that, as a socialite and wife, she could not remain in the shadows and must fully understand the intricacies and complexities of aristocratic society in order to navigate the current situation with dignity and maintain her position. Diana had to secure the support of influential nobles because, as a princess, she needed to build strong and reliable relationships with high society to ensure her future and safety in the harsh court intrigues. Cale sighed, feeling the heaviness of the moment, then thoughtfully adjusted a strand of hair that had fallen out of his hair, as if this gesture helped him collect his thoughts and prepare for the upcoming trials that threatened change and struggle. The entire lady was ablaze with an inner fire of determination and passion, pondering ways to avenge her lover, whose honor and fate were at risk, causing in her an unwavering desire to protect and restore justice at any cost. The husband, in a reserved but firm tone, told his wife that he intended to discuss the entire situation with the butler in order to fully understand the situation and make an informed decision. After this, without delay, he confidently walked away, leaving her alone with her thoughts. Before leaving, he frankly admitted that he had not known about his wife's plans and was surprised by her determination. But despite this, he was sincerely grateful to her for the courage and care she had shown, which touched the lady's heart and gave her strength and self-confidence. The lady, slightly embarrassed and feeling a blush on her cheeks, obediently placed her hand on her chest, feeling how the warmth of gratitude and love gently filled her soul, strengthening their mutual connection and filling her heart with bright hope for a happy future. When she went to bed, inspired by a feeling of happiness and inner peace, a wide and sincere smile blossomed on her face, reflecting the deep joy that her beloved truly appreciated and was grateful to her for all her efforts and care. The girl, as if inspired, rushed around the bed with unbridled joy, jumping from one end to the other, filling the room with the liveliness and light of her soul, which sparkled with happiness and love, giving it weightlessness and freedom of movement. Finally, taking the pillow in her light but strong hands, Hestia, with a feeling of deep satisfaction and peace, fell onto the soft and cozy bed, feeling that all her efforts were not in vain and brought the desired peace and joy to her heart. At this moment, when the night sky enveloped the world with its velvet blanket, a bright star suddenly fell, cutting through the darkness with its light, as if sending a secret sign of fate, filled with hope and a harbinger of coming changes in the heroine's life. The next day, the main character, with determination and a little trepidation, asked the butler to arrange a meeting with the tutor, wanting to personally discuss the details of the training and prepare for the upcoming changes that could change her life for the better. After some time, the servant returned with the news that Madame Harmony had refused to come to her home, preferring to invite the heroine to her salon, which made Hestia wonder about hidden motives and new trials awaiting her ahead. Hestia sighed heavily and settled down on the sofa. Reading a familiar novel, which she had already reread many times, Hestia knew the personalities of all the characters by heart, which helped her better understand what was happening around her and anticipate possible events. The lady convinced herself that she could overcome any difficulties, clenched her fist in front of her and firmly decided not to retreat, despite all the obstacles and doubts that might arise along the way. And so, dressed in a new blue dress, with her black hair neatly pulled back into a ponytail and an elegant blue hat on her head, Hestia headed off to visit her tutor, feeling a slight excitement and anticipation of the upcoming meeting. Standing awkwardly at the gate of a strange house, she was not prepared for the meeting to take place so soon and unexpectedly. Her heart began to beat faster, and her thoughts were filled with doubts and hopes at the same time. Suddenly, the white door creaked, slowly opening in front of her, as if inviting her to enter a world of new possibilities, where many unknown and important things were already waiting for her, things that could influence her entire future life. Inside the house, there were many handsome faces of nobles, among whom stood out a blonde butler with refined features and a noble bearing, who greeted Hestia warmly and greeted her with his elegant bow, setting the tone for the entire atmosphere of the evening. The Marquise, pressing her hand to her chest with dignity and calm, announced that she had an important meeting scheduled with the mistress of this house, intending to discuss matters on which much depended in their complex noble world and social intrigues. At this time, a lively conversation reigned all around. The aristocrats gathered at the event actively discussed the latest news and events, exchanging rumors and sharing their opinions, creating an atmosphere of court intrigue and political games. Hestia, quietly and humbly, remained standing in the corridor, clutching her handbag, trying to stay away from the crowd, maintaining dignity and composure, although inside her heart was pounding with excitement and anticipation of the upcoming meeting. Upon learning who exactly this lady was, many of the nobles began to whisper and gossip among themselves, exchanging unkind glances and assumptions, which only increased the tension and intrigue surrounding Hestia and her role in this society. The lady, feeling the undisguised attention and piercing glances on herself, awkwardly bowed her head and carefully lowered her elegant hat down, as if wanting to hide from the sharp rumors and unkind words that hovered in the air like shadows over her reputation and honor. Hestia suddenly felt a shudder as her name echoed through the conversation, and her heart began to beat faster, filling her soul with a mixture of anxiety, surprise, and slight uncertainty. For these words carried a secret on which much depended. Madame Harmony appeared in the doorway, a woman of extraordinary beauty, with her brown hair neatly styled in a bun and expressive green eyes radiating wisdom and strength, whose appearance seemed to speak of life, experience, and invaluable influence in this society. The Marquise stepped forward confidently, trying to distance herself from the sidelong and unkind glances that tried to darken her presence, resolutely maintaining her inner calm and dignity in the face of social intrigue and discontent. Madame Harmony and Hestia sat opposite each other in the cozy living room, where Madame sincerely admitted that she had not at all expected the Marquise to come in person, which was an unexpected and very honourable surprise for her, emphasizing the importance of the meeting. The aristocrat then added with a slight smile that usually the highest aristocrats preferred to invite her to their home and not the other way around, which made Hestia's visit especially unusual and spoke of her determination and serious intentions. Laughing, covering her mouth with her hand in a coquettish gesture, the girl declared that she had come in person to demonstrate the sincerity of her silver intentions and to confirm the seriousness of her words, intending to prove her readiness for long-term and honest cooperation. Earlier, according to the book's narrative, Diana was able to win Madame Harmony's favor in the same graceful and subtle way, demonstrating sincerity and tact, which allowed her to gain respect and support among influential aristocrats and find her place in society. Suddenly, overcome with anxiety and uncertainty, Hestia burst into tears and quietly, with a hint of feigned vulnerability, turned to the lady for help, hoping to evoke compassion and affection in her to ease her path in the complex and difficult world of court intrigue. Madame Harmony, struck by the sincerity and emotional openness of her guest, suddenly jumped up from her seat, as if struck by the depth of her feelings, loudly pronouncing the name Hestia, which testified to the beginning of a trusting and warm communication between them. Approaching the girl, the woman gently and confidently promised to help her in any way possible, urging Hestia to tell her everything that was troubling her, so that together they could find solutions and overcome any obstacles in her path. Smiling to herself and rejoicing that her carefully thought out plan had finally worked, Hestia continued to cry quietly in order to garner genuine sympathy and affection, knowing that her emotions would help her gain trust and support in this difficult situation. The cozy room was filled with the soft light of the lamp, elegant furniture, and large windows through which the evening light shone, creating an atmosphere of warmth and comfort, conducive to trust and frank conversation between the beauty and her interlocutor. Hestia revealed that she had a stepfather in her life, a lord who had once carefully sheltered her under his protection, and this story sounded sincere and touching, revealing her personal past and evoking sympathy for her fate among those listening. The truth was that the aristocrat herself had acquired the title through considerable effort and cunning to climb the social ladder, but she skillfully concealed this fact, preferring to keep her true achievements in the shadows for the sake of maintaining her image. From Hestia's sad story, it became clear that, although she was far from high society, her soul and thoughts were constantly occupied by her secret lover, whom she tirelessly followed, keeping the hope for a bright future and a possible meeting. Continuing to cry quietly, the maiden confessed that, despite having received the title of Marquise, she still had little understanding of the complex norms of etiquette and court rules, which forced her to seek help from Madame Harmony to set her on the right path. Madame Harmony was embarrassed to hear the frank admission that this was precisely the reason Hestia had come to her for help, to learn the intricacies and rules of high society, which touched her heart and awakened a desire to support and educate the young aristocrat. Wiping away her tears and slightly closing her brown eyes, Hestia looked closely at Madame Tutor, trying to read her reaction in her gaze and understand how sincerely she was ready to support and help in her difficult endeavour. Her main task was to appear before the tutor as a modest, sensible, and kind girl in order to gain trust and affection, thanks to which Madame Harmony could truly help her master the intricacies and rules of high society. Then the woman will certainly not be able to reject her request, because her eyes will sparkle with sincere pity and warm sympathy, capable of melting even the coldest heart and giving hope for understanding and support. The lady stared in surprise and with a hint of anticipation, as if expecting an important answer, and looked intently at the lady standing opposite her, as if trying to read in her gaze the secret that was hidden behind her calm appearance and restraint. Hestia felt a sudden chill in her soul, frightened by the unpredictable reaction of the one who sat silently next to her, immersed in a strange silence, as if deep in thought or doubting for the first time her previous convictions that had seemed unshakable. But Madame Harmony was always that very soul, who generously gave compassion and tenderness to everyone, supported everyone in sorrow and joy, and her kind heart always found words of comfort even for the most lost and lonely. Hestia, feeling a little embarrassed and hesitant, asked the question timidly and quietly, afraid that her request might seem too burdensome or a heavy burden for the noblewoman who deserved only respect and reverence. The lady, raising her hands in a gentle refusal, and with a tender smile on her lips, hastened to explain that she did not at all consider the request difficult or inconvenient, wanting to reassure the girl and dispel the doubts that had suddenly arisen in her mind. Having gathered her courage, the girl, with a slight tremor in her voice, asked the madam not to be shy and to allow her to ask the question that had been tormenting her heart for a long time and had not given her peace, like a heavy cloud hanging over her soul and thoughts. And at that very moment, a question was asked that took the lady by surprise and made her think, causing an internal conflict and confusion in her. How did it happen that she was the one who ended up in marriage with the Marquis, whose name everyone knew and respected? The girl, hearing the answer, froze in complete amazement and shock as if paralyzed. Her eyes widened in sudden shock, reflecting the full depth of her surprise and incomprehension of what she had just heard. Madame Harmony, feeling a little embarrassed, waited with hidden impatience and trembling in her heart for the lady to finally give an answer that could dispel all her doubts and fill her soul with peace and understanding. Hestia felt surprised and slightly confused when she suddenly realized that it was precisely this and nothing else that worried Madame, that her thoughts and feelings were focused exclusively on this, leaving no room for other concerns. The young woman, Hestia, bowed her head dramatically and placed her hand on her chest, stating with sincerity in her voice that she truly admired the Marquis, whose personality and destiny had left a deep mark on her soul, causing her to feel both admiration and awe at the same time. The lady skillfully played the victim, telling how she fell in love with the heartbroken Marquis, creating an aura of mystery and tragedy around herself that captivated everyone and evoked sympathy and attention. Plunged into deep grief and unable to fight his inner torment, he tearfully agreed to the wedding proposal, and the bride, overcome with surprise and slight embarrassment, did not expect such an unexpected answer from him. Therefore, Hestia, striving to express her gratitude and sincere feelings, decided to reciprocate the favor rendered with kindness, tenderness, and care, giving him a piece of her love and warmth that could comfort and support him in difficult times. When Madame Harmony asked her if she had visited the temple, the girl answered with a slight smile and agreed, carefully wiping away fake tears to hide her true feelings and not reveal the depth of the mental pain that was troubling her. Covering her face with her hand in embarrassment, Hestia admitted that her husband was a generous and magnanimous man who, without hesitation, gave all his property to his former lover, the very one who broke his heart and left a deep mark on his soul. With a feeling of genuine compassion, Madame Harmony said that indeed, the Marquis had once been madly in love with Lady Diana, but, unfortunately, she had responded to him so cruelly and coldly that she had left him broken and devastated. Concluding her frank confession, Hestia, resolutely raising her hand, loudly and confidently declared that before divorcing her husband, she sincerely wanted to repay him for the kindness he had shown and try with all her might to restore and heal his broken heart. The woman, hearing these words, with obvious indignation in her voice, exclaimed that the Marquise should not dare to utter such heavy and offensive words in her presence, because it was unfair and hurt her soul deeper than one could imagine. Loudly and passionately, the tutor declared that Hestia had proven the sincerity and kindness of her intentions by her action, returning her husband's rightful lands and property, which was a true act of nobility and wisdom, worthy of respect and admiration. After these words, the madam gently grabbed the beauty by the hands, pressed them to her heart, and comfortingly told her not to worry and not to be anxious, because she would definitely help and support her in this difficult test of fate. After the noblewoman, full of determination and energy, hurriedly ran away, shouting loudly that she would immediately draw up a detailed and well thought out training plan for the Marquis, Hestia remained sitting on the sofa, enjoying the quiet satisfaction that her plan had finally been crowned with success. The studies turned out to be truly difficult and demanding, because the girl still didn't know and understand much, but the tutor taught her patiently and with full dedication, investing effort and knowledge to prepare her for the upcoming trials and changes in life. A few days later, when the tension had eased a little, the maid Clarice, carrying important news on a tray, announced solemnly and proudly that the robber had finally been caught, and now the danger that had threatened them was behind them, causing relief and hope for peace. As Hestia concentrated on writing the letter, a light and gentle smile lit up her face, and the pen in her hand glided confidently across the paper, reflecting all the joy and satisfaction that filled her soul, like the gentle light of a warm spring morning. Clarice, standing in front of her mistress, who was immersed in work at her desk, realized with relief and quiet joy that the thief had finally been caught, for this meant the return of peace and security to the village, which had long lived in anxiety and fear. A woman's hand carefully and smoothly underlined the important lines of the letter, as if trying to give the words special meaning, filling them with care and tenderness, so that every stroke would be imbued with sincere feelings and a desire to convey her thoughts as clearly as possible. Hestia mentally held back an evil smile, quietly laughing to herself at the fact that she was able to take revenge on the couple from the Empire, while Clarice, looking at her mistress, quietly thought that she looked truly happy and peaceful, as if she had found the peace she longed for. Finally, the Marquise, wanting to change the subject and avoid awkwardness, asked the maid with mild interest how her husband was feeling, showing care and attention that hid the depth of her true feelings and thoughts. Clarice was silent for a long time, as if choosing her words and struggling with her inner turmoil, and Hestia, feeling growing anxiety, carefully and with concern, asked if something serious had happened to her husband that required immediate attention. Upon hearing the answer, the lady froze in surprise because she learned that the man really did have a guest, but who exactly this mysterious visitor was remained a mystery, causing mixed feelings and anxiety in her soul. Wary and with a slight hint of distrust, the noblewoman asked how important this guest was for her husband, wanting to understand whether he was hiding something more behind the visit. But Clarice hesitated again, not daring to reveal all the details and leaving the question unanswered. The maid, overcome with sudden surprise, froze in place when the lady, with precision and confidence, announced the name of the guest. It was Hyperion, and at that moment the atmosphere in the room became tense and filled with unexpressed excitement. Intrigued, the woman slowly raised her hand to attract attention, and, with wary curiosity, asked how the lady could have found out who exactly had come to the Marquis on such an unexpected visit, since it seemed like a secret hidden from many. The girl, feeling a surge of anxiety and determination, hurried to take a quick step towards her husband, because Hyperion was not just a guest, but a man with a false name of the Crown Prince, whose identity could bring serious dangers and trials to the family. She ran down the long corridor, her heart aching with fear and rivalry, for the Crown Prince was her rival, a man capable of causing her husband far greater pain and destroying their fragile happiness in an instant. Her face was a picture of blazing anger, her skin was pale, her eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights and worries, her teeth clenched tightly, reflecting all the internal struggle and determination to protect the one she loved at any cost. Hestia stopped just a few steps from the door of her mistress's room, behind which sat Uros, the butler, eavesdropping on their conversation with wary attention, as if trying to catch every word in order to understand hidden intentions and secrets. Seeing the lady entering at the door, the butler immediately perked up and began to justify himself, explaining his anxiety and concern for the lady's safety, fearing that she could be exposed to some kind of danger or harm at this tense moment. The lady, with a soft smile and calm in her voice, sat down next to the man and quietly but confidently reassured him, saying that she did not condemn his actions and understood his concern, thereby relieving the tension and giving him a feeling of trust and support. The butler and the Marchioness sat next to each other by the door, quietly discussing among themselves what could be happening behind the door, making guesses and pondering the possible events that could influence the fate of those inside. Suddenly the door swung open and a bold impulse awoke in the noblewoman. She loudly shouted the name of her lover, trying to awaken feelings and attract attention, hoping to break the gloomy silence and fill the space with a living voice. The man's fist slammed hard against the glass, shattering it, and blood ran down his hand, leaving behind red marks, a clear sign of a recent struggle and intense conflict that had played out in this room. In front of the woman stood two men, their eyes filled with great anger and fatigue, and it was clear that they had just entered into a brutal fight, leaving behind traces of destruction and pain. The sight of her wounded lover made the beauty clench her teeth even tighter, and her gaze became cold and merciless, like sharp ice that can freeze any feeling and give only determination and unyielding will in the most difficult moments. Drops of scarlet blood fell slowly and monotonously onto the floor, leaving behind dark spots, like small traces of pain and suffering, that silently spoke of the depth of the wound and the cruelty that had just happened in this gloomy room. Cale stood by the window, clenching his fists tensely, his hands covered in blood, and next to him stood a man, his faithful friend and comrade, who closely watched his every move and supported him in this difficult moment. The sweet Marquise, overcome with excitement and fear, quickly ran to her husband and, without waiting for an answer, asked if he was all right, noticing how he stood bent over in pain, as if trying to hide his suffering from prying eyes. The prince, standing nearby, suddenly turned to his former friend by name and, with a piercing gaze full of hidden emotions and old grievances, stared at him, as if trying to read long-forgotten words and feelings in his eyes. Helios looked deeply worried and completely confused, not understanding what exactly was happening around him, and stood somewhat hesitantly, carefully observing his friend's behavior, trying to comprehend the situation. Hestia, unable to bear the tension, angrily and decisively shouted for the unwanted guest to leave the house immediately, emphasizing with her intonation the seriousness and categorical nature of her demand, causing everyone around to freeze in anticipation of a reaction. The prince flinched sharply at the unexpected cry, turned towards the source of the sound, and, shocked by the sudden outburst of emotion, stepped back, as if trying to comprehend how far out of control the situation had gotten at that moment. Kyle, immersed in deep fatigue and exhaustion, was in the tender arms of his wife, sweat slowly flowing down his exhausted face, as if symbolizing the severity of all the trials that had befallen him, and in his gaze one could read silent pain and weakness. The heir to the throne, wrapped in a dark hood, quietly and decisively left the room, moving away from the couple so as not to disturb their private moment and also to hide his own worries and inner experiences that weighed heavily on his soul. Kyle no longer had the strength to stay on his feet on his own, and slowly, as if helplessly, he began to sink onto the cold floor, giving in to the fatigue and powerlessness that had taken hold of his body and mind after a long struggle. The girl, noticing the blood on her husband's hands, anxiously and solicitously asked him to be patient, assuring him that the butler would soon come running and call a doctor who would help ease his suffering and restore the health they so desperately desired. Hestia acted as if her whole heart was consumed with caring for her husband, and her obvious excitement was evident in every gesture and look, which reflected deep concern and genuine affection for the one who now needed her support most of all. The sunset sky shimmered with every shade of orange and gold, painting the last moment of the day in warm, delicate colors, as if nature itself were quietly whispering hope and peace, despite the worries and anxieties enveloping the house at this hour. Hestia sat quietly in her husband's room by his bed, watching him sleep almost silently and intently. He was wounded and unconscious, vulnerable, and her every breath reflected a deep anxiety and concern that she could not hide even from herself in this difficult hour. She looked at the young man especially attentively and with pain, realizing that he had lost consciousness, and a strong anxiety and a burning desire to do everything possible to restore his health, strength, and save his priceless life for her flared up in her soul. When the doctor arrived, he carefully examined the wound and, having applied neat bandages, assured that the injury was not deep, which gave Hestia faint hope and relief, despite the seriousness of what had happened. With her brow furrowed and her eyes closed, Hestia sank into deep thought about how sad it was that she had never been able to find out what her husband had previously spoken about with the prince, because these secret conversations could have shed light on many important events and dispelled the troubling doubts in her soul. Suddenly, noticing that Kale had suddenly woken up, the lady quickly jumped back in panic and amazement, not expecting such a sudden awakening, and her heart was filled with anxiety and worry due to his weak state and unexpected movement. With keen interest and slight bewilderment, Kale asked his wife whether she had been informed that the prince was planning to visit them today, and the lady, with confidence and calm in her voice, replied that no such visits were expected and no one was planning to come. On the bed next to him lay a man's hand, bandaged neatly and securely, as if symbolizing the trials and tribulations this man had gone through, and the wounds he still had to heal on the path to recovery and peace. The girl, sitting on a chair, shuddered when she heard her husband's words that he had previously not wanted to receive the prince as a guest, and had decisively refused him, as if trying to avoid unwanted meetings and maintain peace in his home, despite the tension of the situation. However, Helios disobeyed the ban and personally came to his former friend, removing his hood and greeting him warmly, despite the risk of violating boundaries and causing even greater tension between them, demonstrating his persistence and determination. Noticing the boy's poor condition and pallor, Helios asked with genuine concern and worry what had happened to him, trying to understand why his friend looked so exhausted and what trials he had been through recently. But Kale rudely interrupted the prince with a question about why exactly he decided to come to him instead of enjoying his honeymoon, as if expressing resentment and misunderstanding, and also hiding deep feelings and inner doubts under the mask of harshness. Helios frowned and, with a firm and stern tone, asked the Marquis when he had managed to get married and why he had not considered it necessary to tell anyone about it, as if trying to understand what had made his friend hide such an important event from everyone around him. Kyle answered the question in kind, barely containing his irritation, asking if it was really only the prince who was allowed to marry, while other people, including himself, were forbidden from making such changes in their lives, demonstrating deep resentment and dissatisfaction with the situation. The former friend began to shout, declaring that the Marquis's new wife was too suspicious and strange, causing mistrust and anxiety, as if he had a premonition that something dangerous and unpredictable was hidden behind this marriage. However, at that moment, Cal, frightened and with a trembling voice, said that one should not take life so seriously, warning that excessive concern and negativity could only worsen an already difficult situation. Because of the same caution and mistrust, Kyle had previously missed his chance to be with Diana, who ultimately chose someone else, and this bitter defeat left a deep mark on his soul, causing his heart to ache painfully with resentment and loss. Kyle clenched his teeth in anger and irritation, barely containing the storm of emotions that raged inside him, like a raging storm that threatened to break out and engulf everything around with its furious flame of dissatisfaction. The furniture, the windows, and the room around him were filled with a light that seemed cold and unfeeling, as if reflecting the inner emptiness and dark thoughts that did not leave any corner of his mind at this difficult moment. At that moment, Helios stood frozen in place in horror and shock, hearing his friend confess with pain and despair that he did not want to die on the very day the prince married his former lover, and this thought seemed to pierce his heart with an icy arrow of fear. Waving his hand to the side, the Marquis began to explain in detail that his wife had saved his life, and that thanks to her he was able to survive. But the prince, perplexed, asked why he had not told him about his pain then, since they were close friends and had to share their most intimate secrets. The great prince could not understand why they suddenly stopped being friends, drifting apart without explanation, as if some invisible wall had grown between them and erased everything that had once connected them with sincere affection and warmth. Once upon a time, they were truly friends, sharing joys and sorrows, but now, unfortunately, they were separated by the inexorable passage of time and circumstances that changed their destinies and left between them only cold silence and misunderstanding. Kyle lowered his head and felt guilty again, as if a heavy burden of guilt had fallen on his shoulders, causing his heart to clench with regret and a desire to correct the mistakes of the past that now seemed insurmountable. Helios waved his hands and admitted that the boy had not previously been so withdrawn and detached, and anxiously asked what had happened to him, what invisible wounds and trials had changed him beyond recognition and forced him to close himself off from the world. The blonde's hand tightened on his shoulder in a sign of anxiety and worry, as he painfully said that it would be extremely painful for the lady to see him like this, lost, lonely, and destroyed internally, which added even more suffering to their relationship. With a slight, barely noticeable smile playing on his lips, Helios spoke calmly and softly, telling how the Holy Virgin had spent the whole night in anxiety and prayer, inconsolably worried about the health of their mutual friend, expressing her feelings with warmth and deep sincerity. However, his speech, filled with warmth and hope, was suddenly interrupted by the sharp, cold voice of Kyle, who sharply and categorically demanded that he be silent, as if trying to stop any attempts to embellish the situation and force everyone to look at the truth without deception. Clenching his fists filled with despair and pain in his voice, the Marquis exclaimed with bitterness, "Why then Diana, despite her words, never sent him a single letter, leaving behind a chain of questions and painful doubts that tormented his heart?" After these harsh and cold words, Kyle firmly ordered his former friend to leave immediately if he intended to continue making meaningless and empty speeches, thus wanting to put an end to the painful conversation filled with painful grievances and misunderstandings between them. At the moment when the tension reached its peak, the Marquis, overcome by inner pain and rage, slammed his hand sharply against the glass, shattering it into pieces, and this gesture became a clear reflection of his mental anguish and the contradictions that haunted him. Now, the young man, with a heavy heart and bitterness in his soul, regretted his previous actions, recognizing that his arrogance and pride had led to tragic consequences. And it was this pride that had become the cause of much suffering and loss, with which he was now struggling. His wife, full of sympathy and tenderness, listened attentively to his every word and sigh, as he again and again took upon himself all the blame for what had happened, envying the happiness of his friends, and suffering from a deep inner struggle and an unbearable sense of guilt. Finally, laying his head on the soft pillow of the bed, he quietly and piercingly whispered to his wife that, having looked into the deepest part of his heart, he could no longer bear the weight of his feelings and made the difficult decision to leave this world, leaving behind a trail of pain and unresolved issues. The girl listened silently, her hands clasped in her lap, her fingers tightly intertwined, expressing inner tension and hidden anxiety, as if her every gesture reflected a struggle between doubts and the desire to maintain calm and dignity. Suddenly, he turned a deep and penetrating gaze on her, uttering words of sincere gratitude, thanks to which he realized how important it is to be honest with yourself and not be afraid to reveal your true feelings even to the closest person. Receiving these warm and tender words of gratitude from him, Hestia felt her cheeks light up with a slight blush, and a gentle smile spread across her face, filling the room with a soft light, like the spring sun warming the earth after a long winter. Remembering her place next to her husband, she bowed her head in respect and quietly said that no thanks were needed, as everything she had done was a sincere expression of love and support, and did not require any reward or recognition. Hearing her husband's words, Diana froze in place in horror, her face distorted with shock and fear, as if a cold wind had suddenly blown through her soul, causing anxiety and an internal storm that did not give her a moment of peace or hope for calm. She cried out to her poor husband with such force and despair that it seemed her words broke the silence of the room, not believing that Cale could have chosen the day of their wedding to leave this world, because it was too cruel and unnatural even for fate itself. The Holy Virgin was deeply touched and genuinely impressed that Hestia turned out to be a true seer, whose ability to foresee hidden events and feelings allowed her to look behind the curtain of the future, giving her image a special aura of mysticism and significance. Sitting quietly and devotedly at the sick man's bedside, Hestia looked at her husband with tenderness and care, her every glance and movement filled with love, as if she were trying with her warmth and attention to give him strength and confidence in a speedy recovery. Diana, thoughtfully biting her finger, tried to unravel the true motives of the Marquise, striving to understand what exactly prompted her to marry the Marquis. Was it sincere love, duty, or hidden desires, covered by the shadow of doubt and uncertainty? On the very day that Cale opened his heart and trusted Hestia, the girl once again found within herself a burning desire to live and fight, as if his love had become a light for her, illuminating the path in the darkness and giving her the strength to overcome all of life's trials. But at the gala event, standing next to the blonde who proudly introduced her to high society, Hestia felt as if she were the center of attention, where every movement and glance mattered, and she had to prove herself worthy among the noble aristocrats. The aristocratic women seated at the long table looked attentively and somewhat warily at the Marchioness, who appeared among them for the first time, like a new chapter in the long-established history of their society, arousing curiosity and, perhaps, hidden mistrust in many. Hestia, dressed in a dainty new dress with a bow, felt uncomfortable and a little constrained in this sea of attention, as if every pair of eyes was focused on her, evaluating and weighing her every word and gesture in this difficult social game. Tears flickered inside her, barely contained and barely noticeable, because Hestia did not know how to behave in such a situation, how to express herself, and maintain balance in a world where her every action could become a reason for gossip or admiration. A few days ago, Madame Harmony learned that a famous countess was hosting an elegant tea party, an event that promised to be social and important, and she hastened to announce it, given the importance and prestige of this meeting in high society. Sitting at her desk, the girl calmly and with dignity agreed to tell her tutor that she too had been invited to this gala event, where representatives of noble families would gather for pleasant conversations and the exchange of news, which of course could influence her future position. The document stated that the owner of the estate intended to personally entertain all the guests, and eagerly awaited the arrival of the noble ladies in order to arrange acquaintances and strengthen ties between influential families, emphasizing the importance and exclusivity of this event. Countess Erinus, despite her youth, was in no way inferior to Madame Harmony in terms of influence and power, occupying a high position in society and being a respected figure whose opinions and decisions carried considerable weight among the nobility and aristocracy. The tutor, with obvious excitement and concern, asked the lady if she would attend the upcoming social dinner, realizing that this invitation was not just a formality, but an important step that could influence her position and fate in high society. Clutching her head Hestia found herself in confusion and did not know what to do. Whether to accept this invitation, since refusal could lead to a scandal and ruin her reputation, and acceptance could plunge her into a whirlpool of intrigues and social games that she was not yet ready to face. The woman's hand lay calmly on the pen that rested on the table next to the sheet of paper, ready to leave a trace of her thoughts and decisions. Tension hung in the air as if every word had to be weighed and thought out with particular care. The problem was that the countess in question was mean and unfriendly, completely unlike the kind and caring tutor of the main character, and this cruelty caused fear and caution in everyone who knew her. All the information Hestia had about the countess boiled down to the fact that she was a representative of high society, had a sarcastic character, and maintained a neutral, sometimes cold, attitude towards Diana, which caused the girl internal anxiety and doubts. With her head resting on her bent arms, the girl thought deeply about what she should do, whether to go to the upcoming celebration or refuse, because in her heart there was raging uncertainty and fear of the possible consequences of such a choice, which could change her destiny. Madame Harmony, watching her mistress with a cold and appraising gaze, seemed upset and anxious, as if she had a premonition that the decision Hestia would make would entail a whole chain of events that was still too early to speak about out loud. The tutor saw in her charge a delicate flower, not yet fully blossomed, wavering between courage and fear, unsure whether to accept the invitation and risk facing the torrent of social rumors and intrigue that always accompanied such events. Although the girl actually resembled a heroine from a romantic novel, mysterious and slightly enigmatic, with a slight hint of danger, Madame Harmony did not notice these traits at all, seeing in her only an ordinary young lady full of doubts and hopes. The countess who invited Hestia to a social event was impossible to ignore, as she turned out to be a key figure in the book's fate, an influential and important person, whose presence and favour could decide much in the complex interweaving of events and intrigues. Madame Harmony paused in surprise when her charge, despite her doubts and fears, nevertheless decided to go to the festive event, if only for her husband's sake, demonstrating determination and willingness to take a step towards new challenges and opportunities. It was clear that Hestia would certainly be the subject of gossip and rumours as soon as she appeared at a ball among noblewomen, because society was always filled with curiosity and criticism, especially towards those who were just beginning their journey in this world. Suddenly, Madame Harmony slammed her hand down on the table, which instantly caught the attention of her student, causing her to raise her head in surprise and turn her gaze to the tutor, who seemed to want to say something important and serious. With a slight smile on her lips, the woman promised to help all the noblewomen in any way she could, expressing a sincere desire to support and protect those who found themselves in the difficult and sometimes cruel environment of high society, where help and support were worth their weight in gold. Hestia looked at her tutor with surprise and some confusion, not fully understanding what she was talking about. Her thoughts were confused because the promises and plans seemed both encouraging and frightening to her at the same time. It turned out that Madame Harmony had also decided to attend the elegant tea party, which caused an immediate reaction among the aristocrats. One of them froze gloomily, her eyes wide as if this news had come as an unexpected and alarming blow to her. A sudden scream echoed through the mansion and the surrounding forest, breaking the silence and tranquility, like a harbinger of approaching events that were about to change the fates of everyone present. So, Countess Erinys solemnly greeted everyone present, her golden hair softly falling on her shoulders, her blue eyes sparkling with confidence and kindness, and her elegant dress emphasizing her refined beauty and high status, creating an atmosphere of grandeur. The other noblewomen gathered around the table responded warmly to the countess, expressing gratitude for the invitation and showing respect for the hostess, which created in the room an atmosphere of courtesy and mutual recognition inherent in the social receptions of high society. Hestia sat tensely, feeling her heart beat faster, because she was seated right next to the countess, so close that she could feel every movement and smile of this influential woman, which caused both excitement and trepidation. She silently prayed and hoped that everything the tutor had taught her would help her behave confidently at the reception, not get confused among noble ladies, and withstand with dignity all the trials of social life that awaited her ahead. And so, finally, Countess Erinys, with a slight smile and a warm look, turned to the Marquise, who appeared for the first time at their social evening, inviting her to introduce herself and tell a little about herself, thereby opening the doors to a new circle of friends and social life. The woman bowed her head respectfully, showing respect and a desire to support the newcomer, and asked Hestia not to be shy and to speak confidently before the assembled ladies, demonstrating her manners and upbringing so important in their refined society. Hestia leaned slightly and took a deep breath, preparing to answer, recalling all the advice and instructions from her tutor, which helped her feel more confident and not get confused in the company of experienced and demanding aristocrats. During etiquette lessons last year, her mentor explained in detail to her student how to behave at such social events, what kind of ladies could attend the Countess's reception, and how to conduct a conversation with dignity and restraint in order to earn respect and recognition. The woman explained to the young noblewoman with patience and a touch of severity that the other ladies gathered there might look down on her, as she was only 20 years old, young and inexperienced, and that high society could sometimes be cruel and demanding of newcomers. After these words, her assistant smiled kindly and began to tell how one could please other ladies, revealing the subtleties of behavior, the ability to conduct a conversation and present oneself at one's best in order to win respect and favor in high society. Countess Erinys, noticing the long pause and silence of the invited Marquise, gently reminded her that everyone was eagerly awaiting her answer, encouraging Hestia not to be shy and to prove herself in the circle of noble ladies who were closely watching her every move. The young aristocrat became embarrassed, lowered her gaze, and admitted that she was simply shy because there were so many noble and experienced ladies around her whose presence caused her awe and slight excitement, which only added to the charm of her modesty. These words evoked warm feelings among the aristocrats present, who saw in her a sweet and respectful girl, capable of winning hearts and winning people over, which made them look at her more favorably and with interest. Her sincerity and modesty pleased them, and soon they began to whisper among themselves, noting that perhaps the rumors about the Marquise's arrogance were exaggerated or even completely false, because a completely different, charming person appeared before them. Hestia smiled happily and slightly mockingly to herself. Her cunning plan had worked exactly as she had intended, and now she felt confident and relieved that she had managed to win the favor of the noble ladies with her sincere behavior and story. Countess Erinys kindly offered the new and young guest a cup of aromatic tea, and Hestia politely thanked her, accepting the invitation, which became a sign of respect and readiness to enter the circle of high society. Hestia also shared the love story between her and her husband with the audience, skillfully adding a touch of tragedy and slightly shifting the emphasis to evoke empathy and touching emotions in the audience, which turned out to be a very successful move. And it worked! All the kind and sweet ladies believed her, showed sincere sympathy and even sympathized, which further strengthened her fragile position and earned her respect in this social circle of beauties. However, suddenly one of the girls, a blonde, coughed slightly and interrupted the conversation, telling the Marquise that she had one but that she would like to voice, causing curiosity and slight tension among those present. Surprised and stunned, Hestia stood frozen in a daze when asked if she had been bothered by the rumors and gossip that her husband had once been inconsolably in love with Diana, as if the past had once again awakened painful memories and worries in her. Her hand involuntarily clenched into a tight fist, tightly gripping the armrest of the chair, as if seeking support and protection from the waves of emotions that were slowly rolling over her, restraining the urge to reveal her true feelings and maintain noble calm in such a delicate situation. Earlier, Madame Harmony had warned Hestia with particular seriousness and care that some ladies might allow themselves to ask very uncomfortable and provocative questions aimed at testing her composure, fortitude, and ability to maintain a good social presence. At that moment, the woman insistently explained to the young Marquise that if she allowed herself to show irritation, anger, or resentment at such questions, then in the eyes of the social ladies she would immediately look like a child, weak, inexperienced, and incapable of adequately responding to the trials of fate and society. Upset and depressed, Hestia tried her best not to show her vulnerability to those around her, and categorically did not want to seem stupid and naive to them, who was unable to cope with the difficulties and challenges that life put before her. So, to hide her inner uneasiness, she smiled sweetly, covered her face with her hand, and feigned innocent concern, as if asking if there really was any reason for concern, as if trying to convince herself and others of her composure and strength. The night spread its peace over the world. The moon gently illuminated the dark sky, strewn with countless stars, and this entire atmosphere filled the heart with quiet peace, giving the opportunity to forget about worries and anxieties for a moment. At the end of a tiring day, feeling fatigue accumulating in every muscle, the Marquise involuntarily hit her head on the hard surface of the table, as if her body was asking for a break and long-awaited rest after endless trials. When Hestia finally arrived home, she changed into a light nightgown, and completely exhausted and tired, sat on the bed, allowing her body to relax and her thoughts to calm down after a long and intense social evening, filled with trials and worries. Ultimately, the aristocrats accepted her into their society, recognizing her as worthy of rank and respect, which became an important victory for Hestia, and proof of her ability to stay afloat among experienced and sometimes treacherous socialites. One of the aristocrats leaned back on her pillow with a contented smile, feeling relief and joy, because now she knew that the majority of noble women still sided with Diana, her main rival, and this gave her peace of mind and confidence in the future. The countess, taking an elegant cup, took a small sip of aromatic tea and noted that previously the prince's wife had invited many young girls to the castle, trying to strengthen her connections and influence among high society. But this had caused disagreement and discontent. The older ladies, feeling ignored in this process, expressed their dissatisfaction and resentment, considering this attitude towards them unfair and causing discord within their closed but strict circle of aristocratic society. The countess, continuing to slowly sip her aromatic tea, gently addressed her friends with a request to behave more quietly and attentively, reminding everyone that Diana was the official wife of the prince, and she should be treated with due respect and caution despite the tension of the situation. Finally, Hestia realized why the older and more experienced noblewomen did not openly attack her rival, but took a wait-and-see neutral position, trying to maintain balance in secular society and avoid unnecessary conflicts that could harm their own interests. At the end of the meeting, the lady summed up the proceedings, noting that everyone present would be invited to the palace, an important event that promised to open up new opportunities and change the balance of power among noble families and the aristocratic circle as a whole. Taking advantage of the moment, Hestia smiled and with slight confidence announced that she could convey her request to the countess at the palace, where, according to her, she would soon have the necessary connections and influential acquaintances ready to support her interests. Instantly, all the adult noblewomen turned their gazes attentively and eagerly towards the lady, as if expecting to hear something important and interesting, and the atmosphere around was filled with tense anticipation and curiosity, as if everyone wanted to be aware of her latest news. With a warm and subtle smile, Hestia told them that she had recently visited the palace, where she had the honor of speaking with the prince and princess, which had made a strong impression on those present and added to her status in their eyes. After that, they continued to discuss a variety of topics as if nothing had happened, maintaining a casual conversation as if trying to create an atmosphere of mutual trust and friendly communication, which would help smooth out any possible tension between them. Only at the end of the meeting did everyone acknowledge that they now supported the Marquise and were clearly pleased with her words, which became an important sign of approval and recognition of her role in secular society, strengthening her position and influence among the aristocracy. The countess, who was sitting nearby, solemnly announced that from that moment on, Hestia was officially accepted into their society and could now count on their support and respect, which meant a new stage in her life and social status. Tired and lying in her nightgown, Hestia thoughtfully reflected on the fact that the noblewomen were clearly trying to extract the necessary information about Diana from her, as if every word and fact could become for them the key to unraveling the mysteries and intrigues of high society. The true treasure and hiding place for the Marquise was her diary, where she carefully wrote down all her innermost thoughts and secrets in order to keep them safe and not allow prying eyes to learn about her deepest experiences and memories. In this diary, she kept all her memories from her past life, writing down every detail with love and reverence, trying not to miss a single important moment in order to keep her story pure and true for herself. In the book, she reconstructed all the events that took place in recent days, describing in detail every situation, every feeling, and every turn of fate, as if reviving the past and giving it a special meaning, important for her future path. Now, Hestia carefully and intently read the pages of her diary, trying to refresh her memory and not miss a single important detail in order to maintain the clarity of her memories and understand the true essence of the events that had taken place, which was so significant for her. Suddenly, her hand began to tremble involuntarily as her gaze fell on one of the lines that filled her soul with anxiety and excitement, as if a forgotten memory had awakened deep feelings that had long remained hidden in her heart. Suddenly, the girl jumped up from her seat and, overcome by an inner impulse, sat down on the bed, feeling that she had finally found exactly that part of the answer that she had been looking for so long, and this realization filled her with determination and strength. Her gaze changed, becoming cold and silvery, as if full of determination and inner strength, when the memories of the upcoming difficult struggle with Diana and the prince surfaced in her mind, reminding her that fate required courage and steadfastness from her. The mansion seemed alive, its walls holding secrets and whispers of past events, filled with a tense atmosphere of anticipation, as if every corridor and room had witnessed dramatic stories and awaited new turns of fate. The window opened onto a long corridor, along which Hestia walked quickly, feeling her heart beat in unison with her steps, filled with determination because an important meeting awaited her, one that could change the course of her entire life. The lady walked with firmness and determination through the spacious rooms of the house, heading towards her husband to ask his permission to take an action that could become a turning point in their relationship and destiny, forever changing their future together. Suddenly, Hestia hesitated a little, overcome with doubt and uncertainty as indecision pierced her heart. Could she really enter her husband's room without his express permission, violating boundaries and propriety? Her inner voice was torn between desire and caution, because she did not know to what extent such an act would be accepted, and she was afraid of causing inconvenience or discontent, despite the importance of the upcoming conversation and her intention. Then Uros, the devoted servant, responded to the young lady with respect and humility, informing her that her husband was currently in his office and busy with work, which meant that the possibility of a meeting was still open, but required a careful approach and respect for personal space. Inside herself, the girl felt growing anxiety, heavy sadness, and barely restrained melancholy, but she carefully hid all her feelings behind a mask of calm, because she did not want to appear vulnerable or weak in the eyes of others. The servant, with respectful courtesy, invited the young lady to personally visit her husband in his room if she wished to see him, hinting that perhaps her presence would be pleasant and even necessary for him at that moment. For the lady, this was a real shock, almost a shock, because she did not even suspect that her husband did not feel any malice or contempt towards her, and his attitude was perhaps much softer than she imagined. With surprise, full of hope and uncertainty, she asked the butler again if he was really telling the truth, because she could not immediately believe such a thing, and wanted to make sure that what she heard was not a figment of her imagination. With tears quietly glistening in the corners of her eyes, Hestia, with a barely noticeable tremor in her voice, asked if her constant pacing back and forth was irritating her, whether it was bothering the servant and interfering with his usual routine. Her innocent, but at times overly caustic jokes turned out to be so unexpectedly caustic that they almost brought even the reserved butler to tears, and she, trying to diffuse the situation, gently patted him on the shoulder, saying that he would have to put up with her. Uros, clearly upset but not losing his dignity, calmly walked away down the corridor to personally check on the gentleman's condition, and Hestia, standing in place, with a slight smile and a grateful look, saw him off, feeling deep respect for him. Inwardly, without saying a word out loud, Hestia mentally turned to her devoted servant, asking him for forgiveness for everything, for the worries, whims, and unnecessary anxiety, because it was he who patiently helped her, staying close when it was especially important to her. Conscience continued to torment her fragile soul even after long days, like an invisible blade mercilessly thrust into the very heart, giving her no peace day or night, reminding her of every wrong step and word she said. Carus sat in his dark, secluded office, immersed in silence, his face blank as he stared at a drop of water slowly trickling down the glass, as if hoping to find an answer in it. When Hestia, trembling a little with excitement, cautiously entered the room and noticed that her husband was partially undressed, her face immediately flushed with embarrassment, and she lowered her eyes, trying not to betray her great confusion. Without showing any emotion and maintaining composure, as if under interrogation, the man calmly, but with a hint of caution in his voice, asked his wife what brought her here and why she decided to come to him at this hour. Looking down slightly and choosing her words carefully, the girl replied that she was going to visit the prince's wife, and in order to avoid possible misunderstandings, she had informed her husband about this in advance, showing respect and caution. With a slight note of surprise in his voice, but trying not to betray his hidden wariness, Kyle asked whether Diana herself had actually personally invited Hestia to visit her, since such an invitation was a rare and significant honor. To this, Hestia said, reservedly but confidently, that she had decided to take the initiative and pay a surprise visit to the princess without an official invitation, hoping for understanding, and was surprised when her husband gave his sincere permission. The young lady, who had not at all expected such an easy and unconditional agreement on his part, froze for a moment in genuine amazement, and, without hiding her confusion, sat down on the nearest chair, still in slight shock from what was happening. In her mind, she was already prepared for the worst reaction from her husband, even a strict ban, but she still gathered all her courage to go and carry out her plan, despite the possible consequences and internal unrest. However, the man, as if sensing that Diana had long since ceased to care or excite him, behaved calmly and indifferently, as if these events had long since ceased to have any meaning for him or influence on his mood. After a short pause, he again turned to his wife and asked whether it was really because of such a trifle that she began to bother the butler and at the same time no longer pay attention to her servants, wasting time on trifles that were not worth her worries. Brushing her hair away from her face with a light movement of his hand, Kyle explained in a reserved but calm manner that she could very well come to him on her own, without an official invitation, and that this did not raise any objections from him since he trusted her unconditionally. These words made her face instantly turn red with embarrassment, as if a delicate blush had suddenly flared up on her large cheeks, revealing all the inner confusion and excitement that she was trying to hide from her interlocutor. Out of the corner of his eye, the man cast a quick, assessing glance at his young interlocutor, who, sensing the tension of the moment, tried to remain silent and not betray her feelings, plunging into silent reflection and an internal struggle with herself. A few minutes ago, he was reading a book, immersed in his deep thoughts, when suddenly the butler Euros entered and announced that his lady wished to meet him in person, forcing him to stop reading and pay attention to the unexpected news. The kind butler conveyed this news to the gentleman, who, after considering the situation, gave his permission to enter, allowing the meeting to take place despite all the protocols and formalities associated with such visits. Uros continued to cast strange, wary glances at the master, trying to understand what exactly the owner expected from him, remaining in some confusion and internal doubt about his further actions. Suddenly, the man was asked an unexpected question. Could the mistress come to him without prior permission and consent, violating the usual rules of decency and protocol, which made him think and recall past events? Kyle instantly remembered how his wife had previously unceremoniously walked in on him without warning, without asking permission, and without taking his opinion into account. So he simply did not understand why such a question, which seemed strange to him, had suddenly arisen now. He felt both irritated and surprised, reflecting on how this kind of behavior had previously not caused the girl any complaints. But now it had suddenly become a reason for questions and doubts that seemed unfounded and unnecessary to him. Uros, the butler, was in no hurry to leave and insistently asked the master to explain to his wife himself that she could come to him at any time without having to ask permission, because there was mutual trust and understanding between them. With these words, Carl was sincerely trying to make his wife happy and ease her mental anguish. But now Hestia looked rather gloomy and thoughtful, as if her heart was hiding deep sadness and inner turmoil. Hestia was unusually silent, her hands folded in front of her in a thoughtful pose. Her gloomy and serious expression seemed to reflect the internal struggle and anxiety that she tried to hide from everyone, but which did not leave her even for a moment. In her thoughts, the lady was quietly sobbing, tormented by remorse and guilt for the inconvenience and trouble she had caused the servants with her behavior, as if her soul was crying from the realization of her own mistake and inability to avoid the consequences. Gradually, the realization dawned on her that she was hindering the butler with her actions, creating unnecessary difficulties for him for the sake of her own comfort, and this realization seemed to her like an act of arrogance, which she was deeply displeased with. While the lady was quietly sobbing, staring at her trembling and pale hands, her husband, in a cold and stern tone, ordered her that as soon as she finished, she should immediately leave the room, without lingering and without creating unnecessary problems and doubts. But suddenly Hestia, as if remembering something very important and significant, broke the prolonged silence and said that there was something else that she wanted to tell her husband, as if the words had settled deep in her heart and demanded to come out. Standing before the man with slight timidity and excitement, she asked him to take out of the closet a ring with a delicate pink stone which was kept there as a symbol of their connection and special feelings, hoping for his understanding and support in this difficult moment. The Marquise's face changed abruptly. It became grey and gloomy, as if heavy clouds were hanging over his mood, and in a sign of bitter irony, he gave a short smile, revealing hidden annoyance and deep dissatisfaction with the current event and circumstances. The girl waved her hands energetically and confidently explained that immediately after her visit to the palace, she would definitely return this precious ring to her husband, without delaying him for a moment or allowing him to get lost or hurt on the way. Then Hestia began to carefully add that she would be extremely careful with this decoration and would not scratch its surface under any circumstances, taking care of the safety of this valuable and important item for both of them with special sincere care and love. Finally, flushed and with a slight tremor in her voice, she cried out loudly and decisively that she would guard this ring with the pink stone at the cost of her own life, as if swearing to keep it with the utmost devotion, care, and unwavering loyalty. The Marquise listened attentively to her every word, remaining silent, creating an awkward and drawn-out silence in the room where every breath seemed louder than before, reflecting the tension of the moment and the internal doubts with which he was struggling. After a short pause, he rose from his seat, raised his voice, and loudly declared that this would not do, expressing firm and categorical disagreement, which made the lady shudder from the unexpected and abrupt refusal that had dashed her great hopes. The ring with the pink stone was kept in an elegant and expensive box, skillfully decorated with fine carvings and delicate patterns that emphasized its rare value and uniqueness, like a small precious treasure carefully hidden from prying eyes. It lay neatly with the books in a deep drawer of an antique desk, where the bound pages and ancient volumes served as a reliable guard for this precious and fragile object, making it almost invisible to strangers and giving it a mysterious secret. Indifferently and calmly, without a shadow of doubt or unnecessary emotion, Kale slowly and deliberately handed the jewelry to his wife, and with cold confidence said that she should take it forever, as a sign of her power and final decision. The beauty was struck by these unexpected words. Her eyes widened in surprise and shock, as if she could not believe what she heard, and in her gaze one could read a mixture of amazement, bewilderment, and deep inner confusion. The young man, without showing the slightest emotion or doubt, firmly replied that he was giving this ring to her forever, after which he calmly turned and walked away, leaving his wife in complete shock and with a heavy feeling of surprise and bitter loss. Before leaving finally and without a trace, he added one more sharp and unambiguous remark that this ring no longer had an owner, so the lady had the right to take it and dispose of it as she wished without any restrictions. But earlier, Kyle had specifically chosen this delicate pink stone to match the hair color of his ex-lover, infusing the jewelry with a piece of memories and feelings that he still couldn't completely forget or let go of. Hestia gently pressed her hands to herself, squeezing the ring, and firmly decided that she would cherish and treasure this precious piece of jewelry, as if she were keeping in her heart a special memory and an important symbol of their relationship, to which she attached great significance. Then, with a graceful and deep curtsy, she sincerely thanked the Marquis for such a valuable and significant gift, expressing respect and appreciation for his attention and trust shown at this difficult moment. After this, carefully turning away from her husband, she quietly but decisively walked away, quietly saying that she would not bother him anymore and would respectfully leave him alone, demonstrating maturity, fortitude, and confidence in her words and actions. Her gaze was firm, unwavering, and determined, reflecting the deep inner strength and unbending will with which she intended to move forward, despite all the difficult trials, inevitable difficulties, and the unknown that awaited her on this difficult path of life. Looking after his wife, he said thoughtfully and with slight anxiety that the girl had such a tense and serious face, as if she was about to kill someone, reflecting in her gaze determination and a hidden dangerous threat that was difficult to miss. Hestia, with particular respect, asked the butler to immediately send a letter to Princess Diana requesting an audience, hoping for a quick and favourable resolution of the meeting and showing sincere respect for the established rules of palace protocol. Oros extended his hand to the lady, who was already in a hurry to leave, slightly confused and not fully understanding the complexity, importance, and consequences of the situation, trying to hold her back in order to clarify what was happening and avoid unnecessary misunderstandings and mistakes. The letter was delivered promptly and carefully, and soon official written permission from the princess for the meeting arrived, opening the door to an important audience that could significantly change the future course of events and bring new opportunities. The sky above the majestic palace was bright blue and clear, as if the space itself reflected the wealth, grandeur, and elegance of this place, where every element of the architecture and decoration spoke of luxury and nobility. Hestia voluntarily and consciously returned to the luxurious castle, where she was surrounded by expensive furniture, exquisite interiors, and a rich atmosphere filled with history and a sense of grandeur, reminding her of the importance of her position and the responsibility placed on her shoulders. The girl carefully prepared important and carefully thought out information that could easily and effortlessly end the previous relationship, forever changing the course of events and allowing her to begin a new chapter in her life without unnecessary doubts and obstacles. She received a precious ring from the princess herself, which served as an important sign and convincing proof for Diana that Cal no longer had the same love feelings for her. And this jewelry became a symbol of change and the final severance of previous ties. The lady, completely immersed in her dreams and fantasies, seemed to be floating in the clouds, thinking about her lover, imagining their bright future together and hoping for a long and happy life that was yet to be built. Hestia looked attentively and thoughtfully at the ring lying on her delicate hand, and was sincerely glad that perhaps her lover had finally lost his former feelings for the princess, which gave her new hope and confidence in their future together. Clear footsteps were heard, and the beauty carefully and quietly entered the spacious room, uttering apologetic words and asking forgiveness for her lateness, trying to show sincere respect and responsibility, despite her inner excitement and slight embarrassment in front of those gathered. Diana met the Marquis with a cold and penetrating gaze, not smiling and sternly watching her with obvious displeasure and tension. Dressed in strict blue clothes that emphasized her official status, seriousness, and stern character at this difficult moment, Hestia, smiling with a slight shyness and a sincere desire for peace, noticed the princess's face, distorted with irritation and hidden discontent, who clearly looked depressed and unhappy, as if internally struggling with her emotions and trying to remain calm. The lady greeted the princess with a strained but forced and not entirely sincere smile, trying to portray joy and happiness, although deep down her smile was rather artificial and hid real worries and hidden doubts. Coldly and calmly taking a cup of hot tea, the lady replied that apparently the Marquise had a serious and compelling reason for her visit, which remains unknown and mysterious, but still makes one think about her real hidden intentions and goals. Hestia responded respectfully, saying she had come to express her sincere gratitude and appreciation as the Crown Prince's wife, wishing to strengthen the good and trusting relationship and demonstrate her respect and devotion at this important moment for both parties. The administrator then confidently added that the Crown Prince wanted to personally assure the princess of his kindness and sincere respect, hoping for further fruitful cooperation and mutual understanding between all parties involved. On the lady's graceful hand, adorning her fingers, a delicate ring with a delicate pink stone glowed softly, seeming to radiate a warm glow, lending her image a special sophistication and mysterious appeal, captivating the glances of those around her. Diana froze in horror and seemed speechless, because this particular ring was intended specifically for her, a gift that Kyle was going to give her, but then suddenly changed his mind, and now its appearance caused a storm of conflicting and painful feelings and anxieties in her. Recognizing this decoration, the aristocrat immediately turned her face away, trying to carefully hide her true deep emotions, surprise, pain, and resentment, so as not to show weakness and maintain her unshakable dignity in front of everyone around her. After this, Diana gave an artificial and forced smile, shook her head slightly, slowly returning to her usual game of hypocrisy and cold pretense, carefully masking her true feelings under the mask of a cold and confident woman. The princess agreed to listen attentively to her guest, and Hestia froze, blinded by the bright and pulsating light emanating from her interlocutor. But surprisingly, she did not lose her composure and maintained a cold and imperturbable appearance, as if in complete control of herself. However, Hestia noticed that the lady's hands were shaking slightly, and this was what deeply touched her, making her feel the hidden anxiety and inner uncertainty that she tried her best to hide under a mask of calm and confidence. Her fingers, tightly clutching the cup, trembled along with the cup, and the tea inside swayed slightly, as if reflecting the heroine's inner excitement and experiences, despite her outward restraint and cold, emotionless expression on her face. A devilish and insidious smile appeared on Hestia's lips, indicating that her carefully thought out and carefully constructed plan had worked, and now she felt the approach of her long-awaited victory and complete control over the situation. Diana only pretended that everything was fine, hiding behind a mask of calm the excruciating pain and deep suffering that were tearing her apart from the inside, forcing her to hold back her tears and not show weakness in front of others. Diana's face suddenly turned black. Her lips pressed into a tight line, and her eyes flared with rage and hatred, as if an inner fire was burning ever stronger, reflecting her deep indignation and silent resistance to a fate that seemed unfair and harsh to her. Hestia, turning cautiously, noticed that the princess had probably already become convinced of her supernatural abilities. The vision of the future, and now, as if succumbing to this knowledge, began to perceive her in a new way as a dangerous ally possessing wisdom. After this, Hestia handed her an elegantly crafted purple message, as if she were handing over not just a piece of paper, but the key to secrets and mysteries that could change the course of events and influence the future of the entire country, causing everything around to tremble with anticipation. Having opened the envelope, Diana took the letter in her hands and, with trepidation and impatience, began to hastily read each word as if they contained vital information that could reveal the secrets of the coming days and determine the fate of her people and her own life. Suddenly overcome with shock, the maiden realized that this was a prophecy about the future, a prediction that she could use for the good of her country, to change the course of history, save her loved ones, and find a new path through the tangled events, opening up new opportunities for herself. Hestia deliberately put the ring on Diana to cause her emotional pain and make her feel the full weight of what was happening, to deeply wound her pride and at the same time to show her own strength and determination in this difficult struggle for influence. And the letter that was handed over was a subtle but powerful attack on the prince. It was a fragment from a personal diary, filled with intimate thoughts and secrets, revealing vulnerabilities and raising doubts about his intentions and abilities. The letter detailed the country's borders, where bandits and robbers would soon appear, threatening security and stability, and in the past, life had shown that ignoring this threat was a mistake, with serious consequences for the kingdom. Hestia loudly declared that they were not simple bandits at all, but a real enemy army that had come to secretly test the defenses of their state and identify weak points for a future large-scale invasion, threatening the security of the entire country and its people. The princess, overcome with horror and fear, froze in amazement and confusion, realizing the seriousness of the threat that hung over their world and the inevitable danger that they would have to face in the near future. Having become more serious and focused, Diana began to carefully read the message, trying to understand the predictions and warnings about the future in order to take timely measures and prevent the impending war and destruction. The Crown Prince had to wage war under extreme conditions when his father was ill, using only his own forces, demonstrating exceptional courage and strategic ingenuity, trying to defend his state from the enemy despite all the difficulties and trials. Despite all efforts, Helios failed to win and was forced to conclude a truce treaty, but stipulated that foreign traders would be able to conduct business freely and without charge in the empire, which caused a mixed reaction among his subjects. The girl had known about this for a long time, because these negotiations had already been discussed for a long time among the people, and in various circles, where everyone expressed their opinion and shared their hopes and doubts about the fate of their state in the current situation. Moreover, she then noticed that the majority of the people openly expressed the opinion that Carl was the best diplomat, possessing a talent for negotiation and capable of achieving more favorable conditions for his country than any other politicians and government officials. Having finished carefully reading the message, the lady asked the Marquise with slight surprise why she had decided to communicate this important information to her and not to her husband, thus raising questions and bewilderment, and also forcing one to think about hidden motives and goals. The princess shuddered violently and felt a sudden fear when she learned that the guest was interested in the date of the next tea party and when exactly she was going to hold it, which seemed suspicious to her and a violation of the secrets of court life. After this, she loudly exclaimed, accusing the Marquise of excessive insolence and inappropriate behavior that went beyond the bounds of decency and could harm the reputation and relationships within the palace and between influential families. Hestia, having received a good education and understanding the court rules, knew that only the closest people were supposed to know about the time and place of tea drinking, and it was this fact that outraged the princess, making her feel deceived and violated. Pretending to be a naive and stupid girl, she apologized to the princess and artificially shed tears, citing the fact that she did not know court etiquette well and had no malicious intent, trying to soften the situation and avoid conflict. Diana clearly did not believe her and stood there in disbelief, as if in indecision and doubt, not knowing whether to trust the Marquise's words or to perceive them as a cunning and insidious deception that could influence her decisions and emotions. After this, Hestia bowed respectfully, quietly saying that she thought she would bring a useful prophecy, but instead learned more about tea drinking and court intrigue, which caused her inner disappointment and doubt in her expectations. A tired Diana sank into a chair and covered her face with her hand, confused, and not knowing how to answer correctly, trying to hide the internal struggle and confusion that engulfed her mind and soul at this difficult moment of the conversation. Her head ached from tension and worry, and the Holy Virgin admitted that the information about tea drinking was nonsense compared to the weight and importance of the prophecy about war that the guest brought her, changing her entire worldview. Hestia responded with a graceful curtsy, realizing that Diana wanted to tell her the date of the tea party first in order to demonstrate her influence and control, but she did not expect to be met with such coldness and severity in response, which immediately affected the atmosphere of their meeting. However, the princess coldly stated that in the future, the fortune teller should be more polite and respectful towards her, the future ruler of the entire country, reminding her of her high status and demanding appropriate treatment and respect. Now, the beloved saint and kind princess was no longer the innocent and sweet lady she once was, but had turned into a strict, cold-blooded, and evil noblewoman whose will was unbending and whose decisions could not be questioned or discussed. Diana sat calmly on the throne, coldly raising her head high up, demonstrating her power and confidence, while Hestia, making a deep bow, tried to show respect, but felt tension and internal conflict. The pink ring on the Marquise's hand stood out brightly and sparkled, reflecting the light as if symbolizing her hidden strength, secret intentions, and the game they were involved in, where every movement was thought out and had deep meaning. Diana couldn't help but notice and be interested in this exquisite piece of jewelry, skillfully starting a conversation about the ring and looking closely at her guest, as if trying to understand the hidden meaning and reasons for its appearance at that particular moment. Smiling with a slight smile and a hint of mockery, Hestia agreed that it was a gift from her dear husband, thus emphasizing her closeness and connection with him, causing both admiration and slight envy among those present. Boldly and almost defiantly raising her hand closer to the princess's face, she seemed to be showing off her adornment, demonstrating confidence and dignity. But Diana, noticing this, immediately turned away, as she felt unpleasant and awkward from such behavior and open challenge. Diana lowered her head bitterly, clasping her hands in front of her in a gesture of deep sadness and melancholy, but she could not find the strength to utter a word, as if she were internally suppressed and unable to resist these painful feelings and experiences. Activating the mode of a skilled actress, the girl began to say that she had not at all expected such a pleasant gift from her husband, trying to hide her true emotions and present the situation in a more favorable light in order to save face in front of others. Every word she said sounded like blows that hurt the princess, because earlier it was Cale who had planned to give this ring to her, and now it ended up with someone else, which became a painful blow to her pride and hopes for the future. Playing the naive fool, Hestia pressed her hand to her chest with feigned concern and noticed that Diana's face had suddenly turned pale, as if all the colour had faded from it, and with feigned concern asked if everything was okay with her, whether she needed rest or help. Frowning with a slight feigned alarm, she specifically asked if she had said anything unnecessary or offensive that could upset such a refined and respected lady, sitting opposite her and trying to maintain the appearance of calm. Holding back her inner feelings, the lady began to hastily deny that there was anything wrong with her, assuring that everything was perfectly fine, and the decoration that was shown to her did not offend her at all, because she herself had enough jewelry and exquisite gifts. However, stumbling and faltering a little in her speech, she still muttered that, apparently, the Marquis was really very dear to Hestia, and it was for this reason that he made such a valuable gift, which caused an uninvited wave of pain and disappointment in her. Hestia, with a polite bow of her head, acknowledged that she may have made a mistake in not considering how her words and actions might be perceived by the princess, and thus caused unnecessary tension, although she did not intend to offend or hurt anyone. Then the girl, trying to explain her behavior, said that having seen this precious pink stone, she literally fell in love with it at first sight. So struck was she by its purity, sophistication, and fabulous beauty, which was difficult not to notice. She then added that, in her opinion, this colour would be a perfect match for the princess's exquisite hair colour, emphasizing her nobility and elegance, thereby involuntarily hinting at the original purpose of the jewelry. Diana, hearing these words, harbored anger. Her face turned red and her eyes filled with tears, which she barely held back, trying with all her might to maintain her dignity, although the pain from the reminder of the lost gift pierced her tender heart. And as if only now realizing for whom this decoration was originally intended, Hestia theatrically jumped up from her seat and rushed towards the princess with a feigned, sad expression on her face, feigning sympathy and remorse, continuing her carefully thought-out game. A heavy and awkward silence fell between the two young noblewomen, full of tension and unspoken emotions, as if the air between them had become thicker and colder, saturated with mistrust, resentment, and internal conflict. However, instead of any emotional or even polite reaction, Hestia received from Diana only a cold, ringing, silent silence. Nothing more, and it seemed strange and even frightening to her, as if she were talking to an ice statue. Clenching her fists with stubbornness and determination, the lady was determined to see this conversation through to the end, and make the princess finally understand how rude and unfair she had been to her former friend by showing coldness. That is why Hestia, without losing the thread of her performance, theatrically sank into a chair next to Diana and, covering her face with her hands, as if in despair and deep resentment, pretended to cry silently, hoping to evoke sympathy and stir the conscience of her interlocutor. Emphasizing her words with an icy voice, Diana began to express great irony, asking whether the Marquise really burst into tears only because the ring, as it turned out, was originally intended for another girl and not for herself. The princess froze, embarrassed and internally confused, when she heard her interlocutor ask why she had told her such a cruel truth about this decoration, since such information could only hurt and upset her mental balance. Hestia, wiping tears from the corners of her eyes with demonstrative slowness, finally achieved what she wanted. An apology from her high-born companion, which became for her a symbolic victory in this subtle and tense psychological game. Diana, who had considered herself the main character, a saint and a flawless lady all her life, always tried to behave with dignity, following the highest moral standards and rules, so it was especially difficult for her to admit her guilt, even indirectly. But it was at this moment that Diana felt truly ill, because for the first time in her life she was portrayed as a villain, devoid of compassion and justice, and this painful realization dealt a painful blow to her pride and carefully constructed image of a saint. Suddenly, Hestia interrupted her interlocutor's speech, loudly and with exaggerated politeness, declaring that, in fact, it was she herself who should thank the noble aristocrat for much that had happened thanks to their meeting. Diana was initially taken aback by these words, especially when she heard that it was thanks to her, albeit indirectly, that Hestia had finally realized her personal boundaries and learned to separate feelings from duties and weakness from dignity, which seemed unexpected to her. Smiling awkwardly and trying to maintain her dignity, Diana replied that, despite all the misunderstandings, she was truly grateful to the Marquise, at least for the fact that she saved the life of her close friend, and she could never forget that. The lady, with a slight but confident smile, placed her hands on her chest and solemnly declared that from now on she would protect her husband with her own supernatural powers, not allowing anyone to harm him, because now he had become her meaning and support. After these words, a strange expression appeared on the princess's face. Her eyes were wide open, and a tense, unnatural smile froze on her lips, in which one could sense uncertainty, resentment, and an internal struggle with herself, but she chose to remain silent. After a few moments, she simply stood up without saying a word and walked out of the room, leaving behind the empty sofa she had just been sitting on, as if her presence was just a shadow of the past, quickly disappearing from the present. Hestia felt a wave of joy and pride rush through her body with satisfaction. Her carefully thought-out plan had worked, and she had been able to defeat her rival, achieving an emotional and moral victory in this invisible duel of hearts. The mansion stood majestically against the clear blue sky, as if it were part of the noble landscape itself, reflecting the sun's light in its high windows and greeting its owner with its silent but warm presence. Uros, with a respectful expression on his face, came forward and politely greeted the lady who had returned home, bowing deeply in respect, thereby demonstrating his devotion, upbringing, and clear understanding of court etiquette. Uros noted with a slight half smile that, judging by the satisfied expression on the young lady's face, her audience with the princess must have been quite successful, and she seemed to have achieved everything that had been planned in advance. Through the beautiful corridors of the mansion, illuminated by soft daylight, leading to an elegant staircase with carved railings, Hestia walked leisurely, as if absorbing the atmosphere of victory and returning to her native territory after a hidden but important battle. She unexpectedly surprised Uros by mentioning her husband's interests and even his passion for light romances, which, according to the servant, not everyone knew, especially considering the strictness and restraint that the Marquis usually displayed. The man was genuinely amazed at how deeply the lady understood her husband's character and preferences, and even for a moment doubted whether she had deliberately studied him for some special purpose hidden from outsiders. Hestia, already halfway up the stairs, suddenly winced with the realization that she had almost given herself away by revealing too much information that, in theory, she shouldn't have known, and now she had to be more careful in her words. With mild interest and exaggerated politeness, the butler asked the lady what business she planned to complete during the rest of the day and whether she was planning to visit anyone else, given her busy and hectic schedule. The aristocrat, reminding him that she had already warned the servant about her visit to the palace, calmly replied that she had only one goal left for today: to visit her husband and, having completed this visit, to close the day completely, devoting the rest of the evening to rest. With a soft, barely noticeable smile, she turned to Uros and announced that she was only going to pop into her husband's office, exchange a few words, and leave without delay, as it was important to her to maintain a respectful, albeit formal, connection between them. However, contrary to her expectations, Kyle greeted her rather coldly, without a warm greeting, and in a rude tone immediately asked her how Diana was doing, demonstrating not only his knowledge but also hidden irritation or jealousy. The lady stood awkwardly behind her husband, as if pressed to the floor, with a painful feeling of sadness in her heart, because she clearly understood that he still had not forgotten his feelings for his former lover, and memories of Diana still occupied his thoughts. After a few seconds of silence, as if suddenly remembering something, he changed the subject, turned to his wife, and with mocking interest reminded her that she had once claimed to have the ability to see the future and predict destinies. Confused and internally constrained, Hestia froze at his next question, not knowing how to answer whether Diana would be truly happy in the future, because too much depended on her words, the truth and feelings and their fragile marriage. It was at that very moment, as if bound to them by the threads of fate, that Diana stood alone at the window of her palace, dressed in a light nightgown the colour of pale gold, and with her hands folded across her chest, prayed in silence, carrying her sorrow to the heavens. According to the plot, soon after a series of tragic events, the heroine was to forever lose her healing ability, which had previously been her main gift and hope for many, but now became inaccessible, like a dying light in the night. After a couple in love experienced the loss of their best friend, their previously warm and trusting relationship deteriorated significantly, becoming saturated with bitterness and misunderstanding, which made their union fragile and full of unspoken grievances and doubts. The entire empire deeply mourned the loss of such a talented and important man, whose light and abilities had brought hope, healing, and inspiration, but now left behind a void and sadness that was difficult to fill or forget. And in this dark and hopeless situation, Diana was left alone with her loss. She had lost the healing power that she had once been proud of, and with bitterness in her heart she prayed to the gods, begging them to return this gift to her so that she could once again become a support and light for her people. The formerly holy and immaculate Virgin now looked at her hands with alarm and horror, realizing that she had turned from a chosen healer into an ordinary girl with a kind heart, but deprived of her former powers and status, which forever changed her destiny. As a result, the noble circle that had once admired and supported her now turned away, seeing her as nothing more than a burden and a weakness that did not fit into their ambitions and political intrigues, leaving Hestia on the sidelines of court affairs and hopes. The only remaining support for the girl was her husband, the Marquis, but even he gradually drifted away, immersed in numerous political conflicts and difficult decisions that required his complete concentration and deprived him of time for a personal life. Hestia hung her head sadly and wondered what their future might have been like if the young couple had managed to have a child. Perhaps then their relationship would have become stronger, and trials and disappointments would have been less destructive to their unity and love. Hestia couldn't lie to her husband that his ex-lover's future was bright and joyful, because the truth would eventually come out, and she knew how difficult it was to hide the true feelings and fate of those you love. However, deep down, she hoped that after learning the terrible truth, Kyle would still return to the princess to support and help her overcome difficulties, because true care and devotion are shown precisely at such moments. As if guessing her deepest thoughts, Kyle walked up to Hestia, leaned slightly towards her, and calmly said that, despite everything, he had already gotten rid of his old feelings for his ex-girlfriend, deciding to focus on the present and future with her. Hestia thought to herself that her husband's words were just a lie, and she involuntarily squeezed her eyes, trying to hide the pain and deep doubt that were tearing her soul apart, like a secret hurricane inside her calm and outwardly imperturbable appearance. The emotion and the dark, silvery glint in the man's eyes betrayed his true state, as he appeared tense and strained, hiding behind a mask of cold indifference a deep internal struggle that was difficult for outsiders to notice. The noblewoman, pretending to be innocent and naive, behaved like a simpleton, trying to change the course of the future with just one simple ring, as if she sincerely believed that the power of this jewelry could outplay fate and heal even the deepest emotional wounds. And, as if protecting her last treasure, the lady hid the ring in her palms, clutching it tightly to preserve the fragile hope and faith that she could still change everything for the better, despite the agonizing doubts and tormenting fears. Closing her eyes and taking a deep breath, the lady admitted that Diana would soon lose her ability to heal, and this news was a heavy burden for her, which she could no longer hide, because the truth was too bitter and inevitable. Kyle, shocked by what he heard, stood for a moment in mute amazement and could hardly believe his wife's words, because this news destroyed all the hopes and plans that they had so carefully built together, leaving only coldness and uncertainty. After she lowered her head, Hestia again encouraged her husband by confessing that she herself would soon lose her supernatural ability to see the future, which was a difficult and disturbing revelation for both of them that darkened their fate. And indeed she did not lie. After that fall into the abyss of despair, her gift of prophecy ceased to work, and now she could no longer foresee further events, as if darkness had descended on her mind, depriving her of light and hope. Standing opposite her husband with a heavy heart, young Hestia did not know and was afraid to think about whether she would die on the very day that, according to her premonition, would soon come, leaving their future shrouded in darkness and uncertainty. She shuddered at the words of her lover when she heard that she might lose her powers of prophecy precisely because of death, and this realization penetrated her soul like a cold wind, chilling her to the bone and filling her with fear. Hestia smiled through a slight sadness and said with determination that she might survive, adding that she intended to complete all unfinished business in order to leave behind order and confidence in the future, no matter what. Shocked by these words, Kyle recoiled from her, as if he couldn't believe that the girl could not care about her own death, especially when she still had the strength and abilities that could save them both and change the course of events. The girl, trying to calm her husband, asked him not to worry, assuring him that Diana would remain alive and well, and explained that all the key events she had spoken of would only happen in a year or two, leaving them enough time to prepare and make decisions. An awkward silence fell between them, filled with silence and understatement, and Hestia realized that she had said something wrong, something that had caused her husband to have inner doubts and deep discontent that was difficult to hide. But Cale didn't explain anything, coldly turned away and ordered her to leave, leaving in the air a feeling of alienation and tension that they would still have to overcome in the near future, despite all the love and the past. The Marquise extended her hand forward as if trying to stop his departure and keep him close for at least a moment, but suddenly froze, not knowing what words to choose to calm his heart, overwhelmed by anger and misunderstanding. But soon she slowly lowered her fingers down, shook her head with deep sadness, sincerely wishing that he would listen to her words and understand the full depth of her experiences and worries. But she understood that for now this was impossible. After this, the lady quietly left, leaving her husband alone in the room, and with a quiet but distinct slam, she closed the door behind her as if trying to hide her feelings from prying eyes, so as not to show all the pain inside and maintain at least the illusion of calm. Outside the door, Hestia sank to the floor, overcome with fear and agonizing doubts, afraid that she might have said too much, and now this mistake would inevitably lead to rash and bad actions on the part of Kyle, which would only worsen their already difficult situation. The ring he gave her was a symbol of their deep love and tender care, like an invisible thread connecting their hearts and a reminder of those bright moments they shared together, despite all the trials of fate. The new day greeted me with a blue, cloudless sky, where fluffy clouds lazily floated across the endless expanse, giving the surrounding world peace and hope for a better future, filled with light and warmth. Madame Harmony turned to her young charge with concern, her voice soft and caring as she asked what had happened to the girl, noticing her tired and depressed state, as if something heavy lay upon her fragile soul. The young noblewoman looked sickly, withered, dishevelled, and pale, as if her body and spirit had been exhausted by long experiences, and her eyes hid many unspoken words and secrets that she did not dare reveal. Sitting in a comfortable chair, she thanked the tutor for his visit and support. Her voice was quiet but sincere, and every word conveyed deep gratitude for the fact that someone was ready to listen and understand her during difficult moments in her life. Madame Harmony quickly realized that the cause of all the unrest was precisely Hestia's recent visit to the princess, which had obviously left a deep and painful mark on the young girl's soul, and caused many doubts and painful experiences. At first, the Marquise remained silent, sullenly turning her face to the side, as if trying to hide her true feelings from her interlocutor, not wanting to let them burst out and not showing the slightest weakness or uncertainty at this extremely crucial moment. However, soon, having once again turned on a masterfully performed performance with feigned tears in her eyes, she asked with obvious pain and doubt whether she had disappointed her mentor, forcing the listener to reflect on the depth of her experiences and internal struggle. Through her tears, she began to explain that she was deeply excited about the upcoming meeting with the princess, and that this was why she put on the very ring that her husband had once given her, hoping to gain strength and confidence in this way at this difficult moment in her life. Madame Harmony froze as if frozen when she realized exactly what ring her charge was talking about, and horror ran through her body like a cold stream, causing trembling and anxiety that was difficult to hide behind a mask of calm. Playing the role of the offended victim, Hestia sadly replied that this was exactly how it had been, thus confirming her mentor's suspicions, unable to hide her true feelings and experiences that filled her soul at that moment. Then she added, with a hint of horror in her voice, that Diana had immediately recognized the ring when they met, which was an unexpected and alarming discovery for the teacher, capable of turning their entire future communication and relationship upside down. Madame Harmony, trying to remain calm and support her student, gently reassured the Marquise, admitting that, in her opinion, she was simply overly excited and, due to her worries and anxieties, was unable to sleep normally and find peace all night. Thinking that her mentor cared too little about her fate and true experiences, the maiden decided to continue her game and theatrically declared that anxiety and fears tormented her soul more than anyone could have imagined, as if dark clouds were gathering over her future. Upset and with sadness in her voice, she admitted that she was tormented by the fear that the prince's wife would certainly try to separate her from the Marquis, which was an unbearable thought for her, making her heart beat faster from fear and uncertainty. After these words, lowering her head and hiding her tears, she timidly asked Madame Harmony to tell her what steps should be taken to avoid tragedy and prevent a breakup that could destroy their happy life and forever change the destinies of all participants. In her mind, her inner demon and the evil, aggressive servant secretly conspired with each other, trying to portray Princess Diana as two-faced and treacherous, wanting to sow doubt and discord in the soul of the young Marquise, causing her to be tormented and afraid of future betrayal. However, at the most unexpected and decisive moment, Madame Harmony suddenly perked up, grabbed the noblewoman tightly by the hands, her eyes lit up with determination, and loudly declared that the princess would never give in and would not allow herself to be deceived.